Mr. Semenya.
Today we are to hear the evidence of Advocate Simelane. And unless Mr. Masuku says something different, I would request that he approaches the witness stand.
Yes, Chair, if it's permissible, I would like to just summarize as an opening statement before I lead Mr. Simelane in his evidence. It will take a few minutes.
That is
just
quite
to give
unusual. Yes, you may proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Commissioners. Mr. Simelane, as you would know, is a former senior government official who is here in this commission to clarify some issues relating to the TRC cases, or the prosecution or the investigation of the TRC cases. You will have seen from the two statements that he has submitted that his main focus is really to illuminate on how the different departments of government collaborated with each other in an effort to strengthen or support the NPA to deal with this very complex mandate that it had to prosecute post-TRC criminal cases. So his main address really will focus on his role as he assumed the position of Director General of the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development in 2005. And you'll have seen that by 2005, when he took the position of DG, there was the infrastructure for engagement by different departments and the system of collaboration between different officials of government and the different departments on these matters was already established. So he walked into a system that was already functioning. And his evidence will then focus mainly on the functioning of the, or the role of the Justice, Crime Prevention and Security Cluster. We'll talk about its operational structure and its processes. So, and you will place it within the context of what I don't think the Commission has yet heard about just the cluster system and how it functioned and where it drew its mandate and how its main focus really was to enhance the operational capacity of the NPA rather than denude it. And so the context in which the debate about his involvement in these TRC cases will arise from that position as a DG. He has prepared for, as I lead this evidence, you'll hear how he explains what he viewed as commitment by these DGs that he worked with to ensuring that there's this balancing, very skillful balance that they had to strike between the competing interest. On one hand, ensuring that the NPA did its job. On the other, ensuring that when they did the job, they had the resources to do that. So when he talks about the concept of interference, it will be in that context. And you'll see from the own debate that you're going to have with him that there may be differences in how people view the engagement that these DGs had with the NPA and the NDPP. And as you saw, Advocate clearly believes that at some point they overstepped the boundaries of normal supportive role. He will testify as to his own views on what that engagement, whether that engagement firstly was necessary, and whether that engagement exceeded the normal bounds of support to the NPA to deal with this complex TRC matters. Entirely accepts that, yes, so one of the things that you will hear from him is that he accepts that there is a need for accountability. You are investigating a period of time when he occupied an important office as a DG. And as a DG, so he sees himself as having a role in illuminating or giving light to some of the issues that are a mystery, particularly to the families. But Mr. Simelane is also not a person without any experience with the apartheid repressive machinery. His family were affected by the apartheid machinery. And I think if he opens up a bit more, he'll talk about that. But so the idea that he could have been an enemy of prosecuting TRC cases will be dealt with through his evidence. And one will see that he had to balance the national interests in reconciliation, which was a constitutional, which was a necessary approach, given the delicacy of the constitutional state at the time, and as Piccoli also put it in evidence that not everybody was leaping for joy at the inception of the constitutional state. There were some who would have wanted to destabilize the constitutional state, and that the prosecution of these TRC cases were being conducted via the same institutions that had been that had played a role in the apartheid system created a bit more complications. So, commissioners, Mr. Simelane is ready to take his what do they call it, the oath, and present the evidence that he's going to present. I'm going to lead him in line with that broad structure, and his main focus, as I say, is really try and get the commission to understand how different of departments and the officials of that department tried to become a support base for the NPA rather than a restraining force in the NPA. Restraint perhaps was to the extent that they viewed certain prosecutions as posing a national security problem, but he will explain that, why there was a national security concern in some of the prosecutions involving the TRC. And finally, Chair, obviously, most of the allegations he has to deal with arise from an application that is in court, where he was not cited as a party. And to the extent that the parties really believe that he was an obstacle to the TRC, and they wanted to make out a case that there was a negligence of the nature that warranted the kind of relief they are seeking. Mr. Simelane, if he had been given a chance in that case to submit an affidavit, we would have his story here, directly responding to those allegations that now he has to respond to from this platform. But he's happy to do that, and as you will also commend his readiness to immediately avail himself to assist the commission with no rancor, no demur, no sense of restraint. He's here, and he will give whatever evidence he has to give. So he's here, Chair. If it pleases the Chair and the commissioners, he will take the stand and the oath of office, and I'll lead him in his evidence.
Thank you, Mr. Masuku, for that opening statement. Mr. Advocate Simelane, you may go to the witness box. Advocate Simelane, are you going to take an oath or affirmation?
I'll take an oath, Chair.
An oath?
Yes.
Do you swear that the evidence you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, If so, raise your right hand and say, so help me God.
So help me God.
Thank you. Mr. Masugu, your witness.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioners. Mrs. Simelane, perhaps before I ask questions by way of leading, my understanding is that you prepared a short statement that you wanted to begin by, which you'd want to tell the commissioners about, and perhaps we should start there before I can take you through the questions I have by way of leading.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think you said some of the things I wanted to say, so it kind of changes it a little bit. But Chair, maybe for what it's worth, all I would wish you to know.
If you could just raise your voice.
All I'd wish you to
Simelane.
know and be aware of is that this is not going to be an easy process for, I suppose, anybody that comes here. For me, it's not going to be an easy process. I'm a victim as well, and my family of Apartheid. I think you do know
No,
that.
I can't hear, sorry.
I think you are aware that my family does have a matter currently before this commission. Obviously, how it deals with it is a different issue.
Yes, that's better. Thank
Yes. So, and I won't deal with that particular aspect. There are people who are dealing with that aspect with the commission. In that sense, I do have a view about the commission itself and what would take place in here. So I don't only speak as somebody who received a notice. I speak as somebody who is directly affected personally in ways I would not describe here, but I would imagine, because I think you've seen the papers I'm relating to and what they talk to. So it's not going to be an easy process. So I hope, obviously, I'll try and restrain myself as much as I can, but to the extent that I'm not, I'll deal with it and explain to you why I'm not able to do so. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that, I came and I listened to some of the witnesses, and I accept naturally how the families and the applicants would have approached their papers and their cases in the High Court matter. And when I naturally read it, and I think Mr. Masugu briefly touched on it, my initial instinct was that they should have just asked. They should have just asked. Because what that affidavit, in the Galata matter specifically, Mr. Galata's affidavit, before he testified, it was hearsay, because he doesn't know what he was talking about. He doesn't know what he was talking about, he doesn't know the person he was talking about, but he extracted from other people's affidavits those references to me. And if I'd just been asked to say, is there anything you can assist us with to understand, that would have happened. So the consequence of it is that it comes to this particular commission in such a manner that this commission then deals with me via a notice that is reserved for people that are implicated because of the manner in which they are mentioned. Naturally, I know it doesn't mean it's true, but it suggests that the approach of the commission towards you is of a person who already is a person of interest. So I sit and I look at this and I ask myself, why would I be a person of interest in this particular context? So I'm hoping to deal with it. Then thirdly, when the witnesses came here, at least those to whom that affidavit relied on to conclude the way it concluded, resulting in me getting this notice, I think a different picture emerged, and a different picture slightly emerges, you know? And I look at it and I'm saying, I'm sitting here not as a person who received an invitation via a different notice. I'm still here with that evidence, sitting here as a person who's received a Rule 3 notice. I would have expected it to be different, to say, well, now that this is the case, please still do come and clarify. Any way you can clarify and assist the commission to the extent that at least you'd have some information and knowledge. The net result, so that offends me, that I'm here in that particular context. It offends me deeply, and it will likely result in that, which is the chilling effect of it. One won't be able or may not be able to deal with some of the things in the manner I would have originally wanted to deal with it, because it just demonstrates to me that there is a lot of lack of information just generally about how government works, about how government worked. Even those who worked within government, there are just different opinions and different views about different things. And not having a forum where all those things, where all those views and issues are discussed in a way that they are clarified, results in tribes and threads of views that now this commission must try and put together to make sense of it. So I'll try and assist to the extent I can, but as somebody who's directly affected by this in a significant way, it's quite offensive. It's quite offensive. So what I propose to do in the way I'll deal with the points that Mr. Masuku would ask me to deal with is that I'll try and assist you as best as I can from what I know, so that you have a better picture about what I'll be saying. Whether you agree with it or not, or somebody else agrees with it or not, is something different, because that was a major factor in how some of these things were dealt with. There were disagreements. You may currently be under the impression that there was some collusion, there was some agreement. There are a lot of disagreements about pretty much almost everything. So I'll try and elucidate that to the extent possible. And obviously the positions that I held are such that I would, to a certain extent, have had access or had at least an opportunity to mingle with people who would have also added their views. So to the extent I can, without mentioning names, I'll say some of the things that I recall were part of the discussion, just to assist you understand what the atmosphere was, because I think it's less understood that these TRC matters are not just unique. They're the kind of things that I'm not aware of any country in the world that has successfully dealt with them. I try to go back to how Chile has dealt with them since the time that Mr. Piccolo referred to, and I think that society is still under construction, as it were. So I hope you'll be patient with me when I get involved in that particular way, but that's my opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Advocate Simelane. Mr. Masuku.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioners. Mr. Simelane, thanks for those comments. You received this notice in terms of Rule 3.3 from the Commission. And I would say the Commission evidence leaders, actually.
Yes.
And it was on the 19th of September, and you prepared a written response to that notice. But before we go to your written response, you've touched a little bit on how you understood the notice itself. Would you want to perhaps give your evidence on how you understood the notice, particularly by reference to paragraph 3 of that notice?
Yes. I think the starting point goes also to the framing of the terms of reference, in that it's a commission that looks into whether, I'll paraphrase it, into whether there are certain individuals or a group of people, individually or jointly, that in a dedicated, intentional way went out of their way to basically undermine the process of investigation and prosecution of those TRC matters. That's how I understood it. And in different ways, it therefore seeks to understand how each one, by virtue of the positions they held, like myself, and with reference to episodes that took place, whether or not all of that are such that the conclusion that can be reached or that comes out of that assessment is that those individuals or an individual intentionally went out of his or their ways to undermine the investigation and prosecute. So that's how I understood it. Therefore, in that vein, if therefore there were those individuals or individuals within a particular formation that carried out that exercise, that needs to be unpacked and explained so that it can be better understood. So for me, starting as I joined the Department of Justice, well, I was in government before. I was at the Competition Commission since about 98, 99. That's well known. And then I joined the department on the 1st of June, 2005. That's when I started. And just before I started, there was a senior official, a DDG, who was an acting DG, Mr. Dion Radman, if I remember him correctly, because I think my predecessor had left, I think around January, if not thereabouts. So there was an acting DG. In the normal course, a DG is, in terms of the Public Service Act, is nothing but another official of the department, but the highest ranking. In terms of the Public Service Act, you are what is referred to as a head of department. In the PFMA, we are what is referred to as an accounting officer. The difference is the Public Service Act, as head of department, you deal with what is generally referred to as HR matters, which is the basic administration of the department. In terms of the PFMA, we are called an accounting officer because you account for the finances and the budget and the expenditure of a department. Generally, I think in the public domain, people refer to as accounting officer, as if accounting for work in terms of the Public Service Act is the same as accounting as an accounting officer for finances. It's actually two things, but in terms of general speak, I think they're used interchangeably. So I would have been an accounting person, either on the finances or on the administration of the department anyway, by virtue of the fact that you are the head of the department and therefore you run the department. Every director general in the department, of a department, has to be, as part of the structure of government, part of a cluster. Because as Mr. Pigoli did explain here, Advocate Pigoli explained here, and with which I'm in agreement when it described the structure of government, that it's a cluster system. And to a certain extent, commissioners, you'll forgive my repetition, because I just want to make sure at least you understand it the way I understood it. He explained it the way he understood it. But most of it will be repetition. So for emphasis, it will be helpful for recollection as well. So it is a cluster system. And the Constitution obviously gives executive powers to the president together with cabinet. So it doesn't act alone, he acts with cabinet. Then cabinet has structured its way into a cluster system of departments. So the clusters that are there, those that at least I can recall, I haven't been in government for a while now. I don't know if there have been changes, because in each administration, some changes do occur. So at the time that I was there, at least the ones that I could recall, there was then a cluster that relates to this matter, which is the Justice, Crime Prevention and Security Cluster. The acronym is JCPS Cluster of Cabinet, naturally. Then there was the Social Cluster, and there was the Economic Cluster, and there was the International Relations Cluster. There may have been one or two more, I just don't remember, but the ones I can remember succinctly at least are these four. And each cluster at a ministerial level is co-chaired by two departments. Why co-chaired by those two departments? It's because of the subjects of the cluster, what it deals with. Those would be the lead departments on issues relating to that cluster. So with JCPS, security is naturally the police. On a day-to-day basis, they do most of the work. So they would be one of the co-chair justice because of the courts, the judiciary, the administration basically of justice. They become the co-chair. So ministers have that at that level. Social cluster, it would be social development and human settlements. Those are the co-chairs, ministers in that particular cluster. Economic cluster, it would be national treasury. I can't remember which other one would be, but at least national treasury would be there. International relations to be DECO plus another. But in each cluster, there are what are called the core departments relating to the core work of that cluster. So in other words, each cluster has got as many departments as it would be decided they should be in that cluster. But in each cluster, there would be core departments that talk to the subject of that matter. So in the JCPS cluster, for example, The co-chairs naturally are the main departments, the core departments in that cluster, those two. But in the JCPS, you then have Defense, Department of Defense, which is another core because of the nature of its business. Then you have Department of Home Affairs because of the nature of the work that Home Affairs does, right? So Home Affairs is a security department in the country. Then you have Correctional Services. It is also a security department because of the nature of its work, the security there. Then naturally the state security. At the time it was NIA and Secret Service because there were two different departments. Then they were amalgamated into one, and I think a couple of years ago there was they were changed again. So we currently have in state security domestic branch, and we have a foreign branch. So those are the core departments in the security cluster. But the other departments in the security cluster would be social development. It's also a member of the JCPS cluster, at least it was at the time. Department of Transport is a member of the security cluster, and DECO is a member of the security cluster. The reason, really, as I understood it then, and it made sense, is that, well, firstly, in terms of making sure that government work is done by everybody, you must have almost every department in each cluster. But transport does deal with a bit of security as far as maritime security is concerned, because they deal with that in terms of the ports and other things. So security does come in there. So for dealing with those types of issues, they need to be in this cluster as opposed to being in the social cluster. DECO naturally on issues that may have relevance for international relations, DECO would need to be there for its inputs. Social development, it's for issues that relates to children in conflict with the law and how those issues are dealt with throughout the JCPS system, from how the police handle children in conflict with the law to the whole administration of justice, as it were, and also in respect of issues of gender-based violence. So those are the departments that are there at a ministerial level. That's duplicated 100% at DG level. So if you become a DG of a department, you become a co-chair of a DG's cluster that mirrors exactly what I've described. So one of my duties, therefore, as the DG that came with that employment as a job description is that you co-chair the DG's cluster, and your co-chair is the National Commission of Police. So the two of you become responsible as co-chairs for making sure that the DG's cluster, JCPS cluster, does naturally the work that it's supposed to do from a monitoring perspective and so forth. You don't have decision-making powers, but you're basically coordinators. You chair almost like a board. So you don't have your own individual powers as co-chairs. The way we ended up working is that I pretty much co-chaired it because that's just how we ended up working. He didn't want to necessarily chair. Whenever I was there, it became de facto that I chair the cluster, although we're co-chairs. So I don't know if that's all, or if I need to elaborate.
Yes, I think you've now located yourself and in that position as a DG and a co-chair of the justice of the JCPS cluster. But I want to then go into how that cluster approached specifically matters of relating to the TRC, because the Commission's focus is on those particular matters. Can you just broadly tell the Commission how the JCPS cluster, when you took over in 2005, how the JCPS cluster addressed the TRC matters?
Maybe before I do that, as the DG of Justice, the issues of TRC were within that department. They were programmed, ordinary work of that department, even absent the issue of investigations and prosecutions, because the government agenda on the post-TRC matters also include an element of reparations. So in the department, there was a unit that was established we called it the TRC unit, but it was chaired by the late Ambassador Sekwe. but its main purpose was to assist, put together a program in terms of which families that were identified in terms of a formula that was to be developed, it was later developed, could be given compensation. So part of the job of the department was to argue for a budget in terms of which compensation, where it is determined, was deserved, which was expected. It would pretty much be in all cases, but for purposes of processing, we would have needed to have some formula, have certain facts, look at the families affected, and ultimately result in an identification that a certain amount of money of a reparatory form must be paid to that particular family. That was part of the day-to-day work of the department, not the NPA and not necessarily the cluster. The NPA had an additional element of work that it had to do, I think it was referred to the missing persons task team. That was in the NPA. But because the NPA is in the department, as DG, I also therefore had to be responsible to monitor that it actually does what it does in the normal course, receive its reports, and process its reports upwards, obviously to the minister as part of overall departmental reports, and to the extent necessary to cabinet. So there was that element as well that we're running with on the side. And also the department also was the ones where the TRC records were archived and kept. So anybody that in government that needed to have access to that, as a DG, I would have needed to know that there's been a request to access certain type of information. Internally in the department attend to authorization that access be given and so forth and so forth. So we also attended to that in the department. There was a chief operations officer under whom that program, amongst others, resided. But I would have been responsible for monitoring it. So in the nature, therefore, of the cluster system is that because it's a government program that's approved in cabinet, every department goes to the cluster and it accounts for progress it is making on the items on which it is a lead department within its programs, and on those items in terms of which it is in collaboration with other departments. So if there were interlinking efforts or programs, what generally happens in government is that they're what are referred to as interdepartmental task teams, which basically says if we're dealing with children in conflict with the law, justice will come in respect of how those matters are dealt with in the courts. That may include involving the prosecution. Social development will come to deal with issues in respect of which social workers deal with those particular situations as far as their reports are concerned, and the police will come with respect to their work. So what happens in an interdepartmental task team is basically to say, whatever the issue is, the lead department chairs the interdepartmental task team and then receives different inputs from everybody and then formulates the reports that goes upwards in that particular department, but it ultimately ends up in the cluster of DGs anyway for discussion. So everybody knows that who is the lead department on this topic. You get told, you either, if you are not in the interdepartmental task team through your official, you know anyway that whatever they do, you're gonna get access to it and you'll reach it for decision-making purposes when it is submitted in the cluster. So nobody panics about it. But those obviously who are in the interdepartmental task team have to deal with the day-to-day work and process that work. And ultimately we all see it in the cluster itself when it gets presented by the lead department. But in any event, because it's part of the cluster agenda, we all would know that this needs to be here. So it therefore does happen that sometimes the cluster can remember that there's an agenda item here and the lead department is not bringing it for discussion. Any DG in that cluster can raise a hand and say, hang on a second, where are we on this thing? Can the lead department account, obviously through the coaches, so that we understand what's going on? Because it is a program for which all the DGs in that cluster are responsible, not just the lead departments or the court departments on that particular subject. The whole cluster is accountable for the program of that particular cluster. Similarly, all the ministers are accountable for the program of their cluster, even if another department is a lead department on it. So if anything either falls between the cracks or is being handled in a way that others are interested in it, they're entitled to raise it as equal members of the cluster, a board as it were, because no department even if it is a core department on a subject matter, can take decisions on behalf of the cluster. You can't do that. You only take decisions alone in respect of your department, in your department, and you account to your minister accordingly. But on issues that must be reported to the cluster, no department, no group of departments can ever take a decision that binds the cluster. A cluster decision comes after the cluster has deliberated in a formal way. In other words, there'll be agenda, there'll be a scheduled meeting of the cluster, there'll be an agenda, there'll be documentation which are circulated in advance for consideration based on the fact that the lead departments who are submitting documents for that agenda item have processed that particular information with a clear recommendation, and then the cluster, after they've presented and after the cluster is deliberated, then the cluster takes a decision as a whole. So if you go there, whether we are justice, police, defense, social development, we are going there before your colleagues to make an argument that what you are proposing must be supported, and you advance your argument. And they can reject it, as it has happened many times, where they reject, say, no, thank you, we hear you. That's not the way we want to go as the cluster. We want to go differently. It gets changed or it gets sent back for reprocessing. You come back and that type of thing. The decisions in a DG's cluster become a recommendation to the cluster of ministers. So the lead department, once the DGs in a cluster have decided, which becomes a recommendation, that lead department then obviously prepares that particular report, updates it to the extent necessary, and that lead department submits that report to the ministers cluster. And that minister and that cluster will say, we're submitting this report, it's been circulated, can it be considered, discussed, input, and so forth. And then that minister would say, the DGs have discussed this, and this incorporates the work their departments have done, their consideration, and the recommendations carries the support of those DGs. So it follows that when that type of report is presented in that way by that particular minister, the rest of the ministers immediately understand that what they have in front of them is supported by so many people over there and those departments, whatever the case may be, right? Or is not supported. If somebody has a strong view, obviously, which many times that does happen, the minister concerned, if it's not supported, obviously, withdraws it, or it's requested that it goes back for reconsideration and resubmission, which sometimes does happen. When all of that has happened, it then gets sent to cabinet. So in the ministers' cluster, that's a subcommittee of cabinet. You have the minister, obviously this every cabinet subcommittee, it's chaired by the president. There's a deputy president there, there's ministers, and then there are deputy ministers. They process that work. And based on their decision, they recommend that that particular report goes to cabinet. And in cabinet, it's only the president, the deputy president, and the ministers. Deputy ministers, as you know, do not sit in cabinet. So what cabinet discusses, ministers are seeing it for the second time because, well, including the president, deputy president, because they've seen it in the CAB committee together with the ministers. So that's part of how cabinet processes documents and information. So if it's gone to cabinet, the assumption is that in half a day, sometimes it can be longer than half a day, but generally cabinet takes a day. But usually by lunchtime they're done if everything goes smoothly, because they're not seeing anything for the first time. These things have been discussed before, starting from the DG side, and then that decision is made. So it also happens that they discuss again, and between the time that the cabinet subcommittee discuss the issue and the time cabinet discusses the issue, there's been a change of views and so forth and so forth. So when it gets discussed in cabinet, sometimes it's recommended that the matter goes back again in light of new information or new thinking. It goes back and then it comes back again. So that's how it's generally done. So in that framework, at least as I understood it, there's not a single department that can ever take a decision on its own on anything without anybody else knowing, because that framework reflects the checks and balances that are in government. A department that's not working can never succeed in not working, because that lack of progress gets picked up easily, because everybody else in the cluster is supposed to talk to the program of a cluster. In other words, if somebody wants to talk about the judiciary, they know what the program is. Let's say transformation of the judiciary, for example. So if we are not, as the Department of Justice, if we are not submitting progress reports on how that is achieved, Somebody from social development in the cluster can say, no, hang on a second. You guys have not produced a report for so long on this particular issue. What is actually going on in that department? So the check and balance is such that if you are slacking, it gets picked up and that flows upwards, because when people report back and give feedback to their ministers, that type of conversation does take place to say, hey, that DG is struggling over there because we don't know what's going on in that department. It's affecting the performance of the cluster. Or the cluster is doing very well, it's very tight. As a result, this cluster is performing. That's how you get, you get, in a way, assessed and get recognized, and that similarly affects the ministers and the deputy ministers, because other ministers get to hear and get to know anyway. And that usually gets measured also by how much of the work of that department finds its way in the form of reports to cabinet.
So, sorry, can I just come in here, Mr. Simelane, Mr. Masuku? I know you have given a comprehensive statement or statements, and I know you're summarizing and explaining, which is good, but wherever possible, you could always take us along if you have a sense of where you are in the statement.
Yes, I'm on paragraph, page 25. And I'm describing what is on page 25, so paragraph 5. In terms of the work of the cluster, it actually starts on paragraph 3, just the organogram and how the cluster functions, and it goes to, up to paragraph 5. The reason why I'm putting it this way is that when I go further to explain certain specific episodes, you must then understand them in the context of who these people are. And maybe this is the right point that I move on to what was described and mentioned in evidence as a forum of DGs.
Yes, okay,
Right.
Thank you.
So what I've given you is the formal architecture of government. So as soon as you hear that somebody is a DG, in your mind you know that, okay, this person is also part of a cluster, maybe co-chair or no co-chair, depending on the subject of the issue.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, one additional structure that I didn't mention, which I should mention, is that all the DGs become part also of what is referred to as FOSAD, F-O-S-A-D, Forum of South African or South Africa Directors General. So every person who's a DG, in other words, you must be a head of department of a national department. And you must also be a DG in a province. Those are people referred to as DGs. So you can't be a member of FOSAD if you're an HOD of a provincial department. DGs are heads of national departments and heads of the administration in the premier's offices. They become parts automatically of FOSAD, and FOSAD is chaired by the DG in the presidency. And they are there behind FOSAD. It doesn't meet very often, but maybe twice a year. If there's an additional issue that's of importance, maybe 3 times, maximum maybe 4 times, as it were. Every year there's a cabinet lekgotla, and sometime before the end of the year or midway, there's a mid-year lekgotla. So FOSAD attends to those issues in preparation for a cabinet lekgotla. So that's really its relevance. So that is a forum of SADGs. Now, what was described here as a forum of DGs is no formal structure. There's no such formal structure. What was described, rather, is what the DGs or the core DGs of the JCPS cluster referred to themselves. So they decided that. And those core DGs, they were not, I don't remember them being mentioned who they were, but I can almost get a sense who they were, because in that cluster, with many of those departments, there will be the core that talk to security issues. So I'm imagining that that forum would have been the DG of Justice, it would have been the National Commissioner, it would have been the Secretary of Defense. Defense, because it's got 2 heads. It's got the civilian side, which is the SecDef, who's the equivalent of a DG. But as part of the cluster, the head of the Defense Force also comes. So in a cluster meeting, both of them do pitch up. In the police, at the time that I was there, we didn't have the Secretary of Police, because at some point, I think it was in the President Mandela administration, the Secretary of Police, which is the civilian side of the police secretariat, was at DG level. It later did not become at DG level. So what you have therefore there, the DGs in that forum, as they called themselves, is the DG of Justice, the National Commissioner, the Secretary of Defense, the DG of Home Affairs, or at least his or her representative, the Commissioner for Correctional Services, and the DGs for Foreign Intelligence and Domestic Intelligence. So those who deal with the core, who would have been the ones on a day-to-day basis who are looking into TRC matters, would have congregated themselves as a working group of some sort, if you can call it that, to discuss on an ongoing basis issues that talk to the TRC matters. They must have referred to themselves as a forum. In the time that I was there, I don't remember us referring to ourselves as a forum, but we were always a core of DGs that looked into issues. The idea was that when the matter goes to the cluster for discussion, at least all the views of those DGs are known. If the police want to talk to something in the cluster meeting, they would be interested in knowing what the Department of Justice has a say about it, or what I thought about it, because I would need to tell them how it impacts the functioning of the courts, if it impacts the functioning of the courts or the NPA. Intelligence, likewise, would be asked to make input, and vice versa, depending on which department is leading on an issue. If it's core security, you want the support of the core, so that when you go to the cluster meeting as a whole, they are interested in knowing what do your other colleagues think, how does it impact on that and that and that and that. If you don't have a clue, then generally the cluster would say, well, we don't want to discuss this issue because you haven't done your consultations. Go and consult and do the work. So the purpose of the forum, as it is referred to, and to the extent that I'll also refer to it, that's what I mean. I don't refer to FOSAT. But the important thing about that forum is that it has no formality. Whether it's there or not, nobody cares about it. Nobody will ask about it. It's just a working arrangement that those individuals decided to have to facilitate their work. There's no big deal about it.
It's sort of a caucus of DGs.
It's kind of a caucus. So an interdepartmental task team is more important than that forum, in a way. But because those individuals work together, and they need to work together anyway, it works much better if they spend time deliberating on issues. So if there's a security issue that's discussed that becomes contentious, everybody looks silly if you haven't had a discussion about it first and formulated a view. So the idea is that, to the extent possible, it helps if there's agreement, but it's not always expected that we'll have agreement. But what is expected as a matter of principle and of course is that at least you spoke about it and assessed whatever implications there may be there, so that when you present it to all of the DGs, those things are covered. And it did happen sometimes that whenever there was a discussion, another DG would say, but you should have spoken to my department on this issue. And the answer would be, oh, we didn't know you'd be interested in this to this extent. Then they'd say, well, we do have experience on X, Y, Z type of matters. Maybe we should come back and have a discussion. Depending on the decision that's required, sometimes it won't affect that decision. But subsequent to that, those DGs would need to engage with that department, assign an official to engage with that department to go get an update by way of what that department was referring to. So that becomes important. So in a way, therefore, the discussion of the core DGs on any aspect relating to TRC investigations would have required them to input based on how their departments were affected. So in my department, I wouldn't be the big discussant in that kind of group, because anyway, the NPA was doing its work. On the reparation side, internal in the department, we're doing our work. The missing persons task team is doing our work. So we become less involved. We are in the group. You're part of the discussion group, but the people with the biggest views on the issue would be those who on a daily basis are seized with the specifics of issues of security, as the case may be. Justice wouldn't, because it doesn't touch the judiciary. There's nothing yet there. Whatever matter that is before the court is progressing in the normal course anyway. So I'm not a major player as the Department of Justice, because nothing seriously affects us. The reportings carry on in the normal course. So that's what I'm describing as far as the architecture and what that forum refers to. So what Mr. Bikoli testified to is that kind of formation. So when they formulated or conceptualized the prosecution guidelines, or an amendment to prosecution guidelines. I don't know how they conceptualize it, but that group would have initially met and conceptualized and discussed and caucused and did whatever it needed to do, to the point where it would then submit a completed proposal to the cluster as a whole. And the cluster as a whole would then either say yay or nay. In this case, the cluster must have said yay because that program went through to the next stage, which is presentation to the ministers who would have supported it. The document was drafted to the point where it ended up obviously in Parliament, and later on obviously it went to court. So what I'm indicating is how it would have ended that far. It would have started with the core who conceptualize issues, however they conceptualize them. So I can't talk to that because I wasn't there, but I'm imagining in my mind that's what they would have done, dealt with everything, then up to the point where there's execution by way of cabinet approval. Because without that, it means nothing. You can conceptualize and produce documents as much as you want. If you don't reach the end stage, which is approval by cabinet, we are still in discussion mode, as it were.
Right. Mr. Simelane, what I would like us to do now is to focus on the issue involving the investigations and the prosecution of TRC cases. The structures you have explained. How you know? Can you perhaps tell the commissioners how this structure engaged on those issues? You know, where the JCPS structure and to an extent the FOSAD, all those, how do they intersect with the issues that were within the NPA domain, the prosecution and investigation of TRC cases?
Well,
I'm sorry, bearing in mind, Chair, I've deliberately avoided going to the
statement.
Yes,
Yes,
because
we
I
are
would like, I would like him to just speak freely without the constraints of the statement. I'll come back to the statement just
Yes.
to say you've dealt with this and that and that and that
Yes.
in the statement. Yeah, so that's why
Yes,
I've
we
done
are
it.
with you.
Thank you, Chair.
Well, when I joined the department in 2005, and as it appeared in the evidence, most of the issues were already in play. They were already in motion, for example. The TRC issues would have come by way of the TRC report, gets handed over to the president as head of state, it goes to cabinet, it gets discussed, decision is made, and once the decision is made, there's then a lead department which runs with that project. Justice ran with that project. So everybody knew TRC matter, it's a justice issue. So that becomes part of the program of the department from a strategy standpoint in the normal course. When you have your 5-year strategic plan, we have all the things you need to have, but in there will be TRC matters. Therefore, it's required that you report regularly on those. And you are required as a DG to report regularly on those just as part of your performance contract to your minister. But also that work then, as I said, goes to the cluster. The cluster must report on it, and it goes to the minister's natural, and it goes to cabinet, as it were. That's how cabinet keeps track. So cabinet would say, for example, I can't talk to this issue because it's never come to cabinet. I don't know what you're talking about. I hear people talk about it out there in the corridors or in the public domain, as the case may be, but it's never come to cabinet. So I have no clue what you're talking about as a minister. That's what most of the time ministers would say to their officials on any issue. If you want me to take this thing further, or you want me to know, the procedure is prepare a memorandum that comes to me. And that becomes a DG's responsibility. The officials prepare a memorandum. It goes to the minister either for noting or for decision making, as the case may be. Then the minister can look at it and say, oh, okay, this issue, I think it needs to go to cabinet. Then the department prepare a cabinet memorandum which the minister takes through. That's initially how it would work. So at the time that I joined, there were already issues of difficulties between the NPA and the police in the department. You get told when you look at, if you get inducted, for example, and you're giving an update by your DDGs with their teams of chief directors and directors, they'll tell you that DG, on this issue, this is the update, this is the last engagement, there's an interdepartmental task team, this is how it's composed, this is our representative in that particular task team, are you happy with it, or should we change a person, whatever the case may be. You get that kind of update. Then you get an update that says there are difficulties because There's lack of cooperation that is alleged. The police and the NPA are at loggerheads over this issue, and the police still have to submit to the NPA investigators to assist the NPA investigate. So expect, DG, that in the cluster meeting you're going to expect this kind of issue coming up. Naturally, you start attending meetings and you hear. And because you arrive and naturally you are new, your colleagues will tell you that, oh yeah, by the way, your department has a problem. We have a problem of this nature and this nature with your department, or my department and your department are working on this. People will tell you there are things that they consider urgent or important. And it's basically a kind of lobbying sometimes to say, hey, look, let's work close together on this particular issue, because for me to make progress on this priority issue for my department, I need your department. I can't get done unless your department comes along. So let's collaborate, let's work together. Oh no, actually we need a third one, a fourth one, a fifth one. So this forum of DGs must have recognized, in my view, that in the TRC matters, all of them are critical. So they needed to work as a group together to process things as best as they could. The downside of that kind of arrangement is that what if there are conflicts? If there's a conflict between people who have to meet anyway, because we all are going to meet in the cluster, you can almost see that, oh, okay, just like you can see with ministers, with, oh, okay, something's wrong over there. They are not generally chatty to each other, you know, just like you see your parents. You see, oh, okay, something happened yesterday night, there's a problem. So it's the kind of situation where it can't be hidden. Everybody can see. Officials can see, okay, DG is not talking to you. DG, what's the issue? Oh, he's upset about this, that's upset about that. But it always talks to, I can't move as fast as I can because your people are not moving, they're not efficient, they don't come to meetings in the interdepartmental time. It creates major frustration. Friendships are lost in those types of framework because people say, but I must perform, I must account. You could be putting me in a position where if I don't perform, my minister gets upset with me, I could be disciplined, I could be fired. Those things do matter in engagements at that level, just as much as it happens at much lower levels in the department. It's just difficult for everybody when it's at the high level. It gets very, very, very difficult because those are the people who must decide on things. Those are people who must work on things. So if there's serious conflict, everybody pretty much knows that, oops, it's going to be a tough time dealing with these ones. And then obviously there are ways, I mean, we're all adults. There are ways in which we try to resolve issues by, mostly informally. Everybody tries to find out, hey, listen, who knows this person better and can go outward and, you know, outside and talk to this person. Those types of conversations come. And somewhere in my statement I do indicate that there was a time when the discussions in the forum got to the point where it says, but who knows, I mean, I didn't know Mr. Pikoli, for example, had a name by which he was called, which is Njiva. I didn't know. But the discussion got to the point where somebody said, but who can talk to Njiva? Because we need to make sure that he's with us. And in that particular situation, the difficulty for me, which I learned as I got there, is that they were saying, we can't be having difficulties with the NPA because before he went to the NPA, he was DG like you. And we had agreed on these things already, that this is how we'll progress, this is how we'll discuss, this is how we'll deal with matters. So we shouldn't be having this difficulty. You know, we need to find a way in which we can engage with him and so forth, right? And you'll probably ask a question, why didn't they just meet and talk? I mean, I asked myself that question. But you could see that these guys don't want to be in the same room. They don't want to talk to each other. They don't want to be. And you could hear, you know, other things were said that are not necessarily complimentary, and I won't repeat them here. But you could just see, okay, this is a lost cause. So the problem for me is that as co-chair of the cluster, if your co-chair has that kind of view about one or two or three or other departments, you literally then become not just really a co-chair, you really become the chair because you must now manage your co-chair. And while at the same time you're managing the cluster. So that's what I ended up being seized with in terms of trying to engage all the time informally to say, you know what are really the issues? Why is this a problem? And we discuss. It eventually became clear at some point because they were not hiding it. Those DGs, except the DG of DECO never used to come often, but had a representative, except for DECO and transport and social development. The other DGs were clear that we don't want Ackerman. we have a problem with Advocate Akame, you know. So I didn't know, you know, the debate was there. So it's like, oh, okay, you don't want Akame. I mean, what's the issue? And the discussion with everyone, at least in that forum, on TRC matters was always a political discussion. It wasn't a typical program discussion. The TRC matters are just political. And at the time, if you remember who the DGs were, and I think you can get their names, I don't have to say them here. Those DGs were first and foremost politicians in their own right. They were politicians, firstly. Secondly, some of them were actually MK members in their own right. That they became DGs is a function of their deployment. But first and foremost, the late SecDef, for example, was referred to as Commissar. So I was young, I wasn't an MK member. So if you ask somebody, but why do you keep calling this guy who SecDef a Commissar? They say in exile, he was basically a Commissar. In other words, a Commissar is somebody that leads political discussions in exile. Then others, they would refer to others as commander. They still call each other a commander. So why are you calling this person a commander? He's not in the defense force. Because in exile, in MK, that one was a commander. So those labels found their way into the way people operated in government because they had past relations. And in part of the discussions, there would be the issue that, no, but Unjiva is one of us. He's an MK, you know, he understands us and how we think and who we are and why we think this way. So why are we having difficulties engaging with him? There must be a reach out. Maybe he's too isolated there in the NPA. There were all those types of talk. That is isolated. He should have been sent there with support. He didn't get the support. As a result, he's isolated. So he has to now assist that institution, do the best it can, such that it's difficult for him maybe to be as responsive as we would have expected. That's what they would say. So I'm listening there, I'm thinking, okay, so these are the type of issues. But they wouldn't be discussed in the way that I'm discussing it. People would be animated. It would be extremely, extremely serious. So when they say, we don't want this person and that person, and by the way, I didn't deal much with Mr. McAdam, but Mr. McAdam was mentioned in the same way as Ackerman. The difference is, for some reason, there was just something about Mr. Ackerman that everybody said, we don't want Ackerman. So as you debate, they say, no, he must be removed from TRC matters. We don't want him in TRC matters. We don't want him in TRC matters. What is the issue? Go back and forth. What I'm obviously paraphrasing here are series of meetings, different meetings, informal. Sometimes they're short, maybe an hour. Sometimes if people have time, they meet for a little bit longer. But what I'm discussing, because I don't recall the exact date for each particular informal meeting. These are not cluster meetings, by the way. This is not the cluster. They are not formal. They're informal. It's this forum of people that meet to try and resolve whatever they want to resolve. So the essence of it all was that SecDef would say, my members, when we talk in my department about making people available to assist, they are clear that they don't want. So I don't know what to do because they don't want. So I can't put together names. National Commissioner would say the same thing and get the support of the late DG Manzini as far as NIA was concerned, with the input of the DG for the Secret Service. So that was the atmosphere, that it's security issues, domestic, even international, but it was a politically laced engagement every time, because they'll talk about exile, debating exile. They'll talk about Askaris, people who are suspected of being Askaris, you know. So the debate just had a huge many of those kind of issues. So it wasn't really easy, and they were animated about it. And they were clear that they don't want Akame. So it got to the point where...
Sorry, Mr. Simelane, can you perhaps deal with the...
Mr. Masuku, I don't want to interfere with your leading of evidence, but it is almost that hour where we have to take a tea adjournment.
That's fine, Chair.
We'll take a tea adjournment and reconvene at 11:20.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioners. Mr. Simelane, you had taken us into the meetings of what you call the caucus or the forum of the DGs, where a lot of discussions took place, and you had indicated a discussion about Ackerman, and I'd like us to go to that. Well, if you could continue with that evidence that you're giving.
Well, I think as in the discussions, as you know, it was coming out that well, maybe before I did it, Ackerman, when I mentioned the issue of who's a commissar and who's a commander, in relation to that discussion, people would sit and describe how they came to acquire those titles. So it was a matter of revolutionary pride that somebody was referred to as a commissar or as a commander. For anyone who's involved with the formation that describes it, some of its members in that way, it's an important thing if you're dealing with a commissar or a commander, and if you know the differences, even more so. But they would have discussions informally, not related to TRC, but about how they functioned outside South Africa, who they worked with, and those types of things. So it was quite informative in that way, in the different areas where they all were. But they'd also talk about, some of them at least in at least two instances, SecDef indicated instances where he knew people that had been were not asked, they were commanded to go to South Africa to go and do certain work of the type that at that time was being done and never came back. As a result of which there were obviously various accounting levels to which it had to be explained, what occasioned people not coming back. Invariably, it's people that would have been either intercepted or something would have happened to them. Others would have ended up in prisons after being charged in terms of the Terrorism Act, amongst others. Others, basically killed, So the nature in which their engagement with the machinery of the government at the time, the machinery of the government they were describing, which is basically the Apartheid government, as they would say, was always with a sense of, in some cases, hurt, in some cases, anger, in some cases, I can't describe, but you could tell that some of these guys, in what they are describing sometimes on certain episodes, they have a specific view about that particular system, about the people they imagined were working with that system at different levels. Right. So for me, when we discussed issues of the courts, for example, and prosecutions, there would be an issue about, the prosecutors, they would describe them in a way that I wouldn't necessarily always agree with in respect of all of them, but the discussion would be such that, prosecutors, this is what they do, they prosecuted our people, they did this, they did this. Sometimes they'd mention names. I don't think I need to mention names. It's not necessary. But they had an attitude. So the attitude towards Ackerman was deeply resentful, if I can describe that kindly. I could use worse words, but I think it was deeply resentful. They literally wanted nothing to do with him. In fact, there were times when I feared for him, because one did not know what people would end up eventually doing because of the way they felt so strongly about an individual. And more so because while they described and mentioned prosecutors by name, the names that were mentioned here, Oliveira, Ackerman, and McAdam, they would mention Chris McAdam, but really for some reason, it wouldn't rise to the level that they would mention Ackerman. So it was always a mystery to me. I never asked about it. I just felt this is not my place, let me leave it. But at least what we now know is that there's a problem. Mr. Zerbi always argued that I can't engage, meaning him, I can't engage properly with my members because they are giving me problems. They don't want to be seconded. So I don't want to have to deal with what they do to other people because of how they feel about them. As the police, we need to assess what kind of people to send over there. And right now, I'm even having a difficulty just talking to my members about these things. So that's the kind of difficulties that were mentioned. It went on further, lastly, to say there were other people, oh, by the way, other than people who worked with the system in the past, there are people who were sometimes mentioned as being possibly Askaris, for example, to say, no, there in the system, we're going to find different sorts of people. So for me, it was very clear, and in the way in which that grouping of people engaged, the trust was a central issue. If we are not trusted in any way, not even just with a task, if you're not trusted to be in the room, it's a problem. Obviously, people are required to work with a colleague because the colleague is there, the colleague has been appointed. But even when you are there, you have to have people trust you, that outside of a formal meeting that is set where they have to meet you, they can at least talk to you outside of a meeting informally, they can give you a call. Most of the time, nobody called anybody. In fact, the only person that I could call or who could call me was Commissioner Selebi. The others never called me even once on my phone, but we had each other's numbers. So we still, informal as that forum was, we still contacted each other through PAs to say, I need this document from Advocate Simelane, or I need his views on this thing, and I would communicate to my PA. So no, I can tell them that this is my view on this particular issue. For some reason, we never called each other.
Why was that?
Well, I think for me, they were much older than me. At least some of them were even 10 years, 15 years older than me. So generationally, I wasn't their generation, right? It was just so-called, just a smart, loud mouth over there that they had to contend with. But I wasn't their generation. So culturally, it also created distance, right? But also, because of the information they dealt with, and I said some of them were politicians. So in a way, they didn't filter information in conversations. And in these conversations, there wouldn't be others. So in other words, it almost became standard that when these guys are meeting informally, there wouldn't be another official. You know, they're just pretty strict to say, but who's coming in? Who are you? We didn't call you. So it would be people that within that group trusted each other. So they trusted me in a way, and I had to learn to trust them. But you earn their trust, you know. So sometimes you get given only little information, nothing much, need to know basis. And over the years, I ended up getting to know a little bit more about what individually they thought. Because privately they'll tell you that, no, my views, I hate this guy, I don't like Ackerman because, you know, he worked with other operatives of the security state who would do the following things to our comrades. You know, there's a guy who was sent there and there and there. So they'll describe the things that have been described in the public domain, except that for me, they were talking about people that I didn't know, but they were talking about people that they knew personally. And that they knew personally because they had deployed them, or as the case may be. So the conversation was that serious. And from a national security standpoint, obviously the debate as well was that the people of the system they were describing were now we're working with them, we're all in the same system. So those who were in special branch were still there in the police. Those who were in the former intelligence services, in NIS, they were there now in NIA and foreign service. Same with defense, military intelligence. So these guys were saying, I'm dealing with people who basically barely a few years ago, they were on this side of the fence and others were on this side of the fence, and they're now all in one room, and I must manage that. It's not easy. So I got a very clear sense that they have their own individual frustrations within their own departments, let alone at a cluster level. I had the same thing at Justice. And you know, and at least you should know, that Justice was the central point where all these things were executed. It was the Department of Justice that executed everything on behalf of the Apartheid state, from everything that came from law and order, everything that came from defense, found its way in the Department of Justice. And in that department, there were those types of people. And they would say, no, you also watch out for this and this and this and this and that person. And I know because one official, we had to have a meeting with Dion Ratman. I had a meeting with him to discuss that, hey, listen, I know you have certain views about the country based on the political formation from which you come. I have views based on the political formation from which I come. We now have, it was at the time when there was, well, just after it, government, I think, what was it called? National Unity. So we discussed that, hey, we even had a government of national unity at some point. So basically, we're joking to say, hey, we're all on the same side now, so we're all comrades all of a sudden. But as a way of softening each other in a way that we could say we could trust each other. And we made a deal about how I would run the department and how it would impact people that knew their work, and I needed him to engage with them. Whether they liked me or trusted me or didn't trust me, whatever the case may be, he would be the one that engaged with them so that I'm able to work. So if in a department without pretty much security issues as the other departments, that's the engagement I found myself having to do to get stuff done. So I could imagine that. I wonder what it's like in the departments where people are armed. You know, God knows, you know. So fortunately, my comfort was that I never got to know the type of detail of information that I really didn't need to know. You know, those things were handled pretty tightly, that you only need to know what you need to know. It's on a needs to know basis. So I didn't know anything about intelligence at all levels. I didn't know anything about, and I wasn't given access to anything of the sort. At the most, what I could get was what we're talking about. So that was the atmosphere. So if there was this kind of problem with Ackerman, the question is, well, you know, at the end of the day, we have a program that we must account for in the cluster about where this is happening. So in one cluster meeting, the formal cluster meeting now with all of the DGs, this issue came up as a progress matter, and it was reported by the forum of DGs individually that, well, in my department I have this problem, in my department I have this problem, and I summed it up as co-chair that, look, you know, there have been discussions, this is an issue. Then the cluster said, you know what, co-chair, can you and the DGs, the forum DGs, can you go outside, discuss this matter, but can you go and have a meeting, facilitate a meeting between them and the NDPP and yourself on behalf of the cluster, and discuss what the cause of this thing is, so that we can see how it can be resolved and come back and report. So that was the issue. So that's how I then proceeded in that capacity to ask my PA to say, look, can you contact Advocate Picoli's office and inform him that I'd like to have a meeting with him. There's an issue that's come up in the cluster that I need to discuss. I don't remember if in that meeting in the cluster, a representative of the NPA was there, because every DG comes to a cluster meeting with support staff, some officials. And I always had staff from the department, my department in that sense, HQ, but there was also always somebody from the NPA. I think a lot of times it was Willie Hofmeyer that would come. I can't remember if he was there in that meeting, but we made sure in the cluster that the people that provide support must be of a seniority to reflect the issues the cluster discusses. So nobody below chief director could attend a cluster meeting formally. So if a DG can come, send a DDG or a chief director at the most. If not, we are regarded as absent. So fortunately, most of the time the DGs did come themselves, but they'd still come with whoever is the support for ease of follow-up afterwards anyway. So that meeting was set. So I then asked that, no, can I see him before the date of the meeting so that I can give him a heads up of the nature of the issue? So he agreed. So I went to the NPA offices, I met him, I told him, I said, hey, you know, Vusi, there's this issue that's come up. You obviously know about it from the past and that type of thing. So he knew about it. Like, no, I know that these types of views. I didn't know if he knew the extent to which they were expressed, but everybody knew that there was an issue with Ackerman. And I said, well, they're going to raise this issue, and they will say that remove him. So it was clear that, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to remove him. Why must I remove him? You know. So I said, well, these are the arguments that guys raise when we discuss. That he said, no, but I also have to deal with the same problems they have. I've got people here that used to work in the other government, and now they're here. Everybody must deal with this thing, so I'm not going to remove him. So when I left his office, I was clear that, okay, there's going to be a meeting where when this issue comes up, at least I know what he's going to say. And I did tell the other that, well, guys, you know, he's strong. He doesn't feel that it's right. He doesn't want to do it. So, no, it's fine. Let's have a meeting. So we had a meeting in the West Wing. I can't remember who he came with. I seem to recall that he came basically with the essence of the PCLU. It is the guys that we knew worked there. But I don't want to mention it because I can't really recall. But at least in my recollection, Ackerman was in that meeting. It definitely was in that meeting. So again, it was a forum. It was not a cluster meeting, the formal cluster meeting. This was the forum, the informal, the working group, then meeting and Ackerman. There may have been even a third or fourth person, but I don't remember. But there was a time in one meeting where the other members of the PCLU we met with. I just can't remember. I think it was the West Wing. The reason why I keep saying it's the West Wing, because I remember correctly, no other department would host that kind of meeting. So for orderliness and administrative orderliness more than anything, the West Wing was always the best place to meet, because that's where all meetings of clusters take place anyway. So if we were to meet at correctional service, there'd be a question about why would we go meet at correctional services, right? Unless the ministers are meeting there and we are then called to them, which sometimes did happen. So I seem to recall that these meetings took place in the West Wing. There was one room that was common, I think it was room 157 or something like that, but there were another room where we met. But in this meeting, definitely, I think for my purposes today, Akamen was there. So naturally, there's tension. And everybody walks in like, okay, you know, hi, how's it, what's up, so, you know, that type of stuff. Nothing major, you know, polite, but you can sense the tension that it's there, right? Everybody sits down. Naturally, I'm chairing that meeting. Then, okay, chair. Then I said, guys, we're here for this. It's informal. Please. There were other people. I think there was a chief director from the presidency who was responsible for the cluster who was there. I seem to recall that there was a chief director from DECO who was a representative of the DG of DECO in the cluster. I think he was there as well. I can't remember if the general of the army was there at the time. I just don't remember. But the other core DGs were there. Naturally, not the DG of transport, not the DG of social development, but correctional services, and a representative of the DG of Home Affairs, if I recall, was there, not necessarily the DG. So put the matter on the table to say this is the issue. I can't remember the order in which the discussion went, but it was an open discussion. And, you know, obviously there's back and forth. The essence of that meeting is that Advocate Piccoli was clear that, no, I'm not going to do it. That's how the meeting started. I'm not going to do it. So I don't agree with you guys. Mr. Ackerman is here, you know. So they also started explaining what the PCLU really does. You know, this is what the PCLU does. I think as Mr. Ackerman indicated, there was an indication that, no, he's appointed as a special director by virtue of a proclamation. And this is what they do across the board. TRC matters is just one of the matters that they deal with and so forth. So there was a type of explanation. So when it came to the issue that, well, this is how the cluster feels at the end of the day, Advocate Piccoli was like, no, I still don't agree. I'm not persuaded. I'm afraid I can't, you know. So that's how the meeting basically went. You know, it went on. And then the issue was, okay, so, but I mean, what is the issue? So Ackerman explained how they work. He says, no, we're meeting people that are telling us things about which they are complaining, crimes that they believe were committed, in quattro, in the sense that this is what they were subjected to, either falsely accused of being, and then to speak. Everybody just started speaking at the same time. Started speaking at the same time, said, no, this is not right, it's not going to happen, this is not, and in fact, others stood up, not necessarily to leave, stood up and paced about next to the chairs where they'd been sitting. It was a big problem, you know. He said, no, but guys, we need to deal with this thing. He said, no. Advocate Ackerman tried to justify, to explain the need for those prosecutions. And from a prosecutor standpoint, to me, like, okay, if there's a crime, there's a complainant, and it meets the necessary evidentiary burden, there's a prosecution. But what was an issue for me was that, but it looks like you are not talking about these issues that we're supposed to be discussing. You seem to be talking about people who complained about how they were treated outside of South Africa. How is that? You know. Then the debate was those kinds of matters. In any event, if you want them dealt with, we must get a mandate for dealing with it. The cluster must get a formal mandate from cabinet. You guys must do the necessary paperwork to take those issues to cabinet for discussion, so that we report that it appears that there are new issues now or that the cluster is mandated to look into, so that we know if it really has gone that far. But the understanding is that that's not those types of matters.
Mr. Simelane, I'm trying to follow the list. Was there something like us and them, sort of slate-like lists? And how would one, say, define the us and the them, or this list or the other? I'm just interested to know even whether it could have been along racial lines or political lines. Could you help if you can?
No, it wasn't the list of the type where you can say they're slates. It was just one list. To me, it looked like it was on the basis that the highest decision-making structure of the ANC in Lusaka, whoever was in that structure, were the people on that list. On the basis that, I assume, it's people that would have given command orders for certain activities to take place, well, obviously in South Africa, so those were within the TRC matters. Also that even there in exile, if there was an issue of discipline that needed to be carried out, there would have been an approval for it by people in that particular structure, if not that whole structure. So to the extent that somebody is complaining about how that person was treated in camp, that structure would have had the responsibility either to protect, or it would have given a command that something happened. So that would have been the basis of prosecutorial culpability if the complainant was able to give those relevant facts and there was evidence to that effect. So it was just one list. So there wasn't another list to compare to in that particular sense. But the us and them was coming in the context that who are you to be telling us about this list? So for me, it clearly related to how he was perceived. And he had been perceived as an apartheid prosecutor, to say, we're not going to be told by you how you're going to deal with issues that affect us in this way. And in fact, you are actually demonstrating to us now who exactly you are by introducing what you are now introducing to us. Even worse, you now even have a list. So basically, to me, that discourse seemed to confirm what we had been informally discussing earlier with the views expressed about why people did not want Khampepe, because of how they perceived him based on what they personally knew or what they'd been informed of or what they heard either in exile or when they got home or on both occasions. But it seemed quite clearly, and it seemed to be established, that there's a history that they had with Khampepe or with individuals who were associated with Khampepe, of them being the apartheid regime officials, if I can use that term. So that's the us and them that I see. But the list itself, it was just one list. So naturally it descended to, you're prosecuting our leaders, so you're actually fighting with us. Now that conversation was also in the context of the broader political debate about TRC matters in the country and the agenda for nation building, reconciliation, to say, you have that as an agenda of government which everybody in the country is asked to buy into. Nobody is forced, but we are asked through persuasion, moral persuasion, whatever persuasion, to say, however you feel about the past, we are trying to go forward on a nation building. So please cooperate with that bigger project in the best interest of everybody. And I think that still continues to this day. So it was always understood that there were always going to be skeptics. There were always going to be those who were just completely opposed. And we know there were people who were opposed. You remember the AWP carried on with its activities in the different political formations. There were always, on a regular basis in the media, talks that suggested or gave an impression that others are not fully with the program, but people were cooperating. So the fact that there was no overt violence and protest doesn't mean that behind the scenes there were no efforts to undermine the nation-building project. Just like we all can sit here and not assume or believe that there may be others who are still undermining nation-building projects for whatever political reasons, we don't know. As a cluster, we simply worked on the basis that we assess things and risk on a worst-case scenario basis, that we assume the worst, so that if the cluster has to plan and the court departments in the cluster has to plan, they must plan on a worst-case scenario basis. And naturally, those in intelligence even had more information than we knew, some of us in the cluster, and will probably even never know. So they handled that as best as they could. So the idea was to prevent a situation where there could be anything of the type that results in some form of armed conflict or physical form of violence on both sides. Even normal community protests, they were looked at with an elevated eye, because the assessment had to be whether, is it just a normal protest, or is it the type of protest that is linked to other bigger and broader issues. So as a cluster, we will take regular guidance from NIA about those things. And to the extent that there would be alleged foreign involvement, Secret Service would take care of that and would get assurances that there's nothing to worry about. That's why there'll be no report. Only when there is a need to report something will it come through. But for now, just accept that we look into those issues as far as our mandates are concerned, and there's nothing to report. So there's nothing actionable that requires your attention as a cluster. So when this thing came up in this meeting, that naturally also came up to say, oh, we're dealing with an apartheid prosecutor here. We have a problem. It's not going to happen. So everybody turned to the NDPP to say, no, but we can't have this particular problem, you know.
Thank you.
I can't remember whether he was asked to say, no, but do you know about the list or not? But the mood was such that if Ackerman had sprung the list, he must have surprised the NDPP without his knowledge, or there was going to be an explanation to the cluster about why the PCLU was going to be dealing with those matters. So both of them must have known that a list would be produced to further explain in the hope that people would be persuaded to understand. It just didn't turn out that way. Actually, if there was a plan, it then backfired because it achieved the complete opposite. So then the Advocate Pikoli said, okay, no, that's fine. If that's the case, I'm going to remove him. I agree, I'm going to remove him, but you must know that if I need his counsel, I'm going to ask him. So for me, it was like, oh, thank God, he's agreed. So the cause is done. And the removal, it's not the removal of Advocate Ackerman from being head of the PCLU. It was removing from being in charge of TRC matters. So in the menu of issues of the mandate of the PCLU, whatever the mandate was, if it's 5 issues, this one of TRC, just remove him so that our people don't have to work and be led by somebody they have these kind of views about. That's all it was about. So as soon as Advocate Pikoli agreed that, no, it's fine, you know, if people feel that way, he'll reluctantly remove him. He was clearly reluctant because he was clear that he doesn't think it was necessary. Just like the others didn't understand why he doesn't think it's necessary. But the purpose of the meeting was not to explore people's thoughts in that sense. It was just to see what's the cause. If this is your deal breaker for you, if he's now removed or he will be removed as promised, then that should be the end of the issue. And then that's how the meeting ended, because it was already not a pleasant meeting. I was like, okay, no, we've agreed. There's nothing else, you know. But there were hummings, but nope, the meeting is over. Let's end it. And that's how the meeting ended. So as I say in my statement, that decision in that meeting, I then took to the cluster meeting where I reported that the mandates I was given as co-chair with the DGs to go and engage on this issue that affects cooperation is now resolved because we managed to secure from Advocate Pikoli that Advocate Ackerman would be removed from these TRC matters in light of the views. So going forward, we can expect that the issue of cooperation will not be an issue for us to be concerned about because we now expect cooperation between the two. So whatever was causing the police to not put people forward, that decision, that resolution can be accepted to me that going forward the police should do so. That's basically what it meant. So for me, that was the end of my mandate by the cluster that go and attend to this issue with the DGs. That was the end of it. It was just a pure administrative issue, nothing to further deal with. So I sat back like every other DG going forward and dealt with the normal work of the cluster. Although we still did continue to discuss in that forum of DGs the various matters. I don't know if I...
Yes, thank you for that, Mr. Simelane. But can I then suggest to you that the discussion around Ackerman, if it were to be regarded as interference with the NPA, it would only be interference to the extent that he intended to prosecute he intended to prosecute people who were involved in the liberation struggle. Would I be right?
Personally, my observation is that with these TRC matters, as I said, you know, the people that one was dealing with, many of them were politicians in their own right, first and foremost. The fact that they became DGs would have been a function of how they were deployed politically. That's my sense. So they were politicians in their own right, and they had their views politically in their own right. In fact, some of them were senior members within the political party in the ANC anyway. So what one got was views from people who would deal with issues of their departments and the cluster in the context of their positions as directors general. But in those conversations, they would introduce things that they would have had discussions on outside of government, within a political party, in whatever formations they're in within the political party, and share that information. Naturally, it was enriching, but some of it didn't have anything to do or was too relevant for decisions that we needed to take. But it assisted to understand the thinking politically into these particular matters. So some of the thinking went, when people deal with these types of matters, there would be wild allegations, wild of the type that I don't think they're worth mentioning here. But we do know, and I think Mr. Nguga did give an indication of how a wild allegation affected him at some point. So there were wild allegations made about different people of that type.
Yeah. But
so,
I think
so in the sense that
Mr. Masuku, I don't think your question has been answered.
yes, that's what
Yes.
I was trying to follow up on.
Yes, I think you must try and
Rein him.
take control of your witness, because at times he goes astray in answering your direct question.
Yes.
Yes, you may put your question directly.
Thank you, Chair. The question I was asking, Mrs. Simelane, is to the extent that there is an allegation that the DGs were interfering with the work of the prosecutors in the TRC matters. The example you've given us appears to be an example in which the target of prosecution were members of the were people who have been involved in the liberation struggle. In other words,
Members of the liberation movement.
the liberation movement, yes. In other words, there were no the discussion the evidence you were giving does not suggest that there were discussions around the prosecution, for example, of former apartheid generals, and that's what this group of DGs were concerned about. They were more concerned about how Ackerman had decided or had given them the view that he would be prosecuting, amongst others, this particular group of people which was in the list. Would I be correct to say that, to the extent there was the allegations of interference in prosecution, it was not Ackerman prosecuting apartheid generals, but it was Ackerman prosecuting those that were involved in the liberation struggle?
Yeah. In the context of that discussion and the list that he produced, it was felt that that's what he was doing. But in the context of the cases he had also mentioned that fell within the mandate that he was prosecuting, that group understood that that work is ongoing anyway, but none of which was being interfered with, as far as I recall, that group thought. Those prosecutions were going to go ahead. But the new one that he had introduced in that particular debate was what they were engaging with, to understand why.
Okay, so can you perhaps just give an indication of the precise problems, other than the fact that this group of DGs felt that they felt that the support that was being withdrawn, that was not being given to the NPA, was based on a lack of trust. Were there any other factors that would have impeded, or that came from the DGs, that would have impeded Mr. Ackerman from prosecuting former apartheid generals, for example, or former apartheid agents who had not been given the amnesty by the TRC Amnesty Committee?
Well, not as far as I know, but what I recall and understood the cluster program to be relating to, as far as cooperation is concerned, was the numbers of, and I deal with this, I think, in my supplementary statement, on paragraphs. paragraphs 52 to paragraph 58. Yeah, in a way. So what really was expected as far as cooperation is concerned is naturally the numbers that the NPA would have indicated it needs. I don't remember a number specifically, but there would have been an issue about the numbers of people, the quality of the people in terms of their rank, their experience to do the work necessary that would have enabled the matters to be dealt with. So those issues were being discussed in the context of it would have been important to assess that it's the right kind of people that would attend to the matter without creating any difficulties.
Yes. Now, Mr. Simelane, I do want us to go back to the notice and the specific allegations that were raised in that notice for your attention. Commissioners, we can now start referring to the bundle, the Simelane bundle, starting with the notice, but the specific portion of the notice that I intend to look at is with the paragraph, page 3, which says particulars of implication. And then it says the knives are out for Piccoli, and then there's a whole, the allegations that are set out there. Mr. Simelane, you'd have read those allegations, right?
I read the notice.
The notice. And you'd have read the allegations, specific allegations on which you asked to respond.
Yes.
Right.
Sorry, you're referring to what?
The notice.
paragraph? The notice, yes.
Yes,
Page
page 3,
Page 3, okay, I'm there. Oh, yes.
under the paragraph particulars of
Yes,
implication.
knives are out for Piccoli, yes, okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Now, if you look at the paragraph 260, the allegation 260, it says shortly after the Chicane plea and sentence agreement had been confirmed in court, a newspaper article appeared in the Rapport newspaper of 19 August 2007, in which it was claimed that the NPA was preparing to prosecute ANC leaders. According to Piccoli, the claim was made on the basis of a note that Ackerman had prepared more than 4 years previously, when he first looked at the universe of possible cases. That note was forged to suggest it was made recently, and that Ackerman was targeting the ANC leadership. A copy of this newspaper article is annexed. The NPA responded by way of a press statement dated 21 August 2007, in which the allegations made in the report were denied. A copy of the statement is also annexed as FA 37, and the page is numbered there. By explained that at some point, one of by reference to the West Wing meeting, that you did see a list produced by Ackerman of ANC leadership who would have been the target of prosecution by him. You recall that evidence, right?
Yeah, I recall the list that he produced in terms of which he said they would prosecute this side and that side.
Right. And then the next paragraph, 261, it says, at this time, and this implicates directly you, at this time, the then Director General of the Department of Justice, Menzi Simelane, had approached Piccoli and raised concerns about Ackerman's handling of the TRC cases. He asked Piccoli to relieve Ackerman from his duties in respect of those cases. Piccoli declined to do so. From what you've said, from the evidence you've given, is that statement correct?
Which statement?
The statement in paragraph 261, which I just read.
No, it's not correct. The second last sentence is not correct. I didn't ask him to relieve Ackerman. I told him what the meeting would discuss and what would be said in that meeting.
Right. And of course, if the applicants in that case had asked you to comment on that, you would have provided the context in which this was said, right?
I would have provided them information about what I specifically told Advocate Piccoli.
Yes. And then they say, after the newspaper article was published, Piccoli was summoned to a meeting of the subcommittee of the Justice Crime Prevention.
Sorry, can I say something, because I don't like the way this is going. Statement in paragraph 261 was read in the context of paragraph 260, and it suggests that the two go together. I know nothing about paragraph 260. I
You-
only
you
heard
know
about
nothing
it for
about
the, yeah, 260. The first time I heard about any forged letter or whatever was in this forum. At the time that we were discussing these issues, I'm not aware of that thing.
Yes.
So the two are separate. They don't follow each other. What is in the notice seems to suggest that 261 is related to 260.
Yes.
I'm saying it's not. I don't know what 260 is about. What I know is 261 to the extent of giving the correction.
Okay.
So I don't know if the list that was produced by Ackerman in the meeting is the same as this thing referred to in 261.
And then in 262, it says after the newspaper article was published, Pikoli was summoned to a meeting of the subcommittee of the Justice, Crime Prevention and Security Cabinet Committee of Post-TRC Matters, which was held on the 23rd of August 2007. And then it says the meeting was attended by several cabinet ministers, Directors General Silebe and Silebe. Cabinet ministers included Minister of National Intelligence Services, Ronnie Casserole, Minister Mabanda, and Minister Skoye, amongst others. Were you in this meeting?
No,
Did you know anything about this meeting?
no, no.
Right. And then if you look at paragraph 263, the fact that there was a special cabinet committee on the post-TRC cases speaks volumes. The existence of such a high-level committee devoted to a particular class of criminal cases pointed the importance of those cases to cabinet, and the cases have become the subject of political intervention. What's your comment on that?
I'm not sure what comment is sought from me. That's an opinion of somebody else, and I don't think I need to comment on somebody else's opinion.
Well, the reason I asked the question is because you gave your evidence on the cabinet subcommittee was that there was a which was mirrored by the committee of this cluster of the DGs. It is in that context that I was hoping that you would comment on whether you find it a complete oddity that there would be a cabinet interest or a special cabinet committee that looks at these particular cases. It's really of you, but if you don't want to say anything about it, that's fine.
No, I don't think it would be amiss if cabinet, on a matter of that type, deemed it necessary to have a committee specifically for those matters. It sometimes does happen. Those types of subject matter committees are referred to as interministerial committees, IMCs. So for example, if South Africa is going to host an international conference, there would be an IMC that would oversee the preparations towards that particular conference. So I don't know if this cabinet committee on post-TRC matters seems to be referring to that committee, but there was an IMC on TRC matters. So I don't know if it's the same thing that's referred to, but there was an IMC.
And then if we go to paragraph 264, it records Pikoli's account of this meeting in his Nkadimeni 2 affidavit, is that those at the meeting immediately demanded answers from him about TRC matters. You are not in this meeting, so you can't really comment on it.
Yes.
We'll go past that, but you were asked to, the basis of the notice was that you should pay attention to that particular paragraph. And then paragraph 265, they referred to a meeting of the 28th of August 2007. Pikoli received a fax letter dated 8 August 2007 from the minister, which is annexed. She referred to a meeting of the 23rd of August 2007 and noted that the subs held a different view in respect of the forgery of certain NPA documents. She complained that she had not been advised of the decision to investigate and wanted to know the basis of this, or the basis thereof. Are you aware of this letter of the minister?
No, I'm not.
Were you ever involved in advising the minister at all on this?
No.
Then in paragraph 266, it says Pikoli responded to the minister's letter by way of a letter dated 29 August 2007, a copy of which is annexed. In this letter, Pikoli referred to the 23 August 2007 meeting And there's a quote, which I consider to be most unpleasant. Despite the information I put before the committee, I am both surprised, disappointed to see that I now stand accused of misleading, alternatively having lied to the subcommittee members. Did you ever advise the minister on this particular on this particular complaint by Mr. Pikoli?
No.
And then paragraph 267, it says, Pikoli confirmed that there was no investigation by the NPA against the 37 ANC leaders, including the president of this country, contrary to the assertions of the National Commissioner of Police. He added that it is clear that my account of the position as it relates to the NPA's handling of the post-TRC cases has been completely ignored. Do you have any comment about it, about that paragraph?
No.
But were you aware in your time as a DG of any position taken by the NPA in respect of the 37 ANC leaders?
No.
And then in paragraph 268, Pikoli reminded the minister that his predecessor had satisfied himself that there was no basis for the leadership of the ANC to be investigated and that he had briefed the then Minister of Justice as well as the President. Pikoli also advised the minister that all the dockets relating to TRC cases which had been stored at the office of the DPP in Pretoria had been handed over to the SAPS. Are you in a position to make any comment about that?
No.
And the reason I read this, Mrs. Simelane, is because the evidence leaders wanted you, they say you are implicated because of these particular paragraphs that I'm reading to you. And it comes back to your earlier remark at the beginning of your statement. And then in paragraphs, with reference to paragraph 269, Pikoli concluded his letter by requesting an urgent meeting with the minister. Pikoli also requested an opportunity to appear before the National Security Council to give a true account of this issue. Are you aware of that engagement between Pikoli and the minister?
No.
Do you know of any, whether the minister acceded to Mr. Pikoli's request to address the National Security Council?
I don't know. I don't. If it was mentioned in passing at some point, I don't recall it.
Then the minister did not respond to Pikoli's, that's paragraph 270. The minister did not recall to Pikoli's request, and the meetings never took place. On 27 September 2007, Pikoli was suspended from office by...
See, 27, on 23rd.
Sorry, on 23rd September 2007, Pikoli was suspended from office by President Mbeki. Shortly after his suspension, he learned that Ackerman had been relieved of his duties. Did you have anything to do with, or do you know anything about the paragraph, the allegations made in paragraph 270?
No. I'm aware that at some point, I can't remember the dates. If that's the dates, then it's fine. But I do remember that there was a suspension of Advocate Pikoli at the time.
And then the shortly after the part that talks about Ackerman having been relieved of his duties in relation to the TRC cases, it appears to have come as Mr. Pikoli, as the allegation in the Galata affidavit suggests, shortly after the suspension of Mr. Pikoli on the 23rd of September 2007. Would you have any recollection of when Mr. Ackerman was suspended?
No.
And at this time in 2007, you were still the DG of the department.
Yes.
And you would have had nothing to do with the suspension. You would have, I mean, he was not reporting to you. He was not in your department. You would have had no power to suspend him. Am I putting it correctly?
To suspend who?
Ackerman, Mr. Ackerman.
No.
Mr. Ackerman, who would have had the authority to suspend Mr. Ackerman?
Whoever in the NPA was responsible for him.
The NDPP, I suppose, the National Director of Public Prosecution.
Well, it depends, because the other thing that must be remembered is that the NPA is a program of the department. So the head of department is responsible for Public Service Act and Public Service Regulation enforcement and those regulations. So if it would have been misconduct on the basis of that, it would have been the DG would have done it.
Yeah.
So it would have been me.
But you didn't certainly.
There was never any matter regarding Mr. Ackerman that would have required disciplinary nature in that sense.
Yes. And then in paragraph 271, and this would require your response, according to Ackerman, he was summoned to the office of Advocate Mukotedi Mshe, who had been appointed acting NDPP. Mshe advised Ackerman that he was relieved of his duties in relation to the TRC cases with immediate effect. In his affidavit, FA8, Ackerman assessed that he had no doubt that Advocate Mshe received a political instruction to remove me from these cases. Ackerman advised Mshe that removing him from the TRC cases would not make the cases go away. That statement is also proved to be prescient. Do you recall? I mean, what's your comment on that question? Because you are aware that, in fact, that political instruction alleged to have been given to Mshe possibly came from you.
Possibly came from?
From yourself as the DG. We'll get to that allegation, but you are now aware, having listened to the evidence, or at least read the papers of some of the statements that were presented here. The allegation was that that it was you. In fact, it's Ackerman who said that in his evidence.
No, it should not have come from me.
So you did not have any? Did you have any discussion with Mr. Mshe about Mr. Ackerman?
I don't recall it. I don't recall it.
And then paragraph 272, writing his 2015 affidavit in Kadimeng 2, Bikolo observed the following: I little doubt that my approach to the TRC cases contributed significantly to the decision to suspend me. It is no coincidence that there has not been a single prosecution of any TRC matter since my suspension and removal of the TRC cases from Advocate Ackerman. The political interference or meddling that I have set out in this affidavit is deeply offensive to the rule of law and the notion of independent prosecutions under the Constitution. It explains why the TRC cases have not been pursued. It also explains why the disappearance and murder of Noctulus Melane was never investigated with any vigor, and why the pleas of her family and their representatives were ignored. Do you have any comment about that particular allegation? No. Are you aware of any political interference or meddling in the cases that involve the TRC cases?
No.
Then paragraph 273, and then the paragraph there says Ackerman concluded similarly in his 2015 affidavit. In quotes, there is little doubt in my mind that the investigation and prosecution of the TRC cases have been effectively stopped by machinations that took place at a level above that of the NPA. Such interference serves to explain why the Simelane matter, as well as the bulk of the TRC cases, have not been seriously investigated and pursued and prosecuted. In doing so, the rule of law has been undermined and the deep injustice has been committed against the family of the late Noctulus Melane, as well as the families of the other victims of the Apartheid era crimes. Do you have any comment about that?
No.
Mrs. Melane, you would have no comment at all about whether the investigation and prosecution of the TRC cases have been effectively stopped by machinations that took place at a level above that of the NPA?
I wouldn't be aware. I wasn't involved in any of that, so I wouldn't know.
And then paragraph 274. Now, with Mr. Pikoli and Ackerman out of the way, government was in a position to appoint compliant officials to lead the NPA, take charge of the TRC cases. Going forward, the TRC cases were now firmly frozen, and no amount of lobbying and agitation by families and their representatives would move the new leadership of the NPA to act. Mrs. Melane, would you say that, would you agree with that statement?
In relation to my appointment, I don't agree with it. I don't know about others.
Why don't you agree with it?
Because there was no matter that was presented to me by way of a report that said the matter is ready for prosecution, and it was never prosecuted. Secondly, there was no matter that was submitted to me in which it was indicated that the matter is ready for prosecution. In the reports that the different units gave or would have given was that these matters remain under investigation.
Yes. And then the next paragraph deals with the general inquiry. And then it says the years following the suspension from office of Pikoli and the removal of Ackerman and the TRC case were marked by almost total absence of activity on the TRC cases. Was that your experience when you were either the DG or, sorry, at this time you were now the NDPP?
At the time that I was DG during Africa Pikoli's suspension, I don't know, because I was the DG. At the time that I was in the NPA as Deputy National Director and later as NDPP, I don't agree.
Why don't you agree?
Because as I indicated earlier in relation to 274, the reports that were submitted to me verbally or in writing, if they were, I just don't recall, they indicated that the matters are under investigation.
Right. And then it says that on the same day that Pikoli was suspended on 23 September 2007, the President announced the creation of the general inquiry into the fitness of Pikoli to hold the office of the NDPP in terms of Section 12(6)A of the NPA Act. Dr. Frederick Chinala was appointed on 28 September 2007 to head the inquiry. Remember that inquiry?
Yes.
And then it says, according to Dr. Ramaite, that's paragraph 277, then the acting NDPP, sorry, according to Dr. Ramaite, the then acting NDPP, when the President established general inquiry, the SAP has declined to further investigate the matters pending the conclusion of the commission. Were you aware of that decision?
No.
This was, the Excellence, this was disclosed in his 31st January 2013 letter to Tembing Kadimeng. The reference to a decision to refuse to further investigate is a misnomer, since the SAPS had already refused to investigate the TRC cases as far back as 2003. There was no legal or other basis for the SAPS to continue refusing to investigate the TRC cases pending the outcome of the general inquiry. I don't think I should ask you to comment on that one because it says nothing about you. In the general inquiry, that's the next paragraph 278, in the general inquiry, the government made a number of complaints against Pikoli. One of them being that Pikoli handled the post-TRC cases. The government's Pikoli's handling of the post-TRC cases did not show sensitivity to victims and an appreciation of the public interests that were mandated by the prosecution policy. Do you recall that allegation?
Yes, I remember to the extent that it was contained in the government submission.
And can you perhaps tell us about this government submission, if you have any?
What do you want to know about it?
Well, you've mentioned, you've made reference to it. You say to the extent that this was contained in the government submission, and I just want a picture of what that would have
just put together.
Yeah.
No, in terms of the Ginola process, government put together a submission. Dr. Ginola did not issue, and the evidence leader here can correct me, Advocate Simelane, because I recall that at the time there was no guidelines issued about how the parties were going to interact with that commission. So what was decided was that government would put a submission, and therefore all the officials, including myself, were required to contribute information that could form part of that submission. So in relation to my area of work, that's what I did. We put together information, and one government submission was then put together that was signed off for submission. It contained different allegations from different places, different departments, if I can do that.
To the extent that your department or your input was reflected there, did you say that Pikoli's handling of the TRC, of the post-TRC cases, did not show sensitivity to victims
No,
and appreciation of the public interests that were mandated by the prosecution policy.
no, I didn't say that.
And then paragraph 279, it was alleged that the NPA concluded plea bargains with the Fundameve and others, the Chikani case, without discussing them with the ITT. What was the ITT?
I don't know what the ITT was. I don't remember it.
Or informing them, is that not interdepartmental task team?
I know an interdepartmental task team. I'm not sure if it was called the ITT, so I don't know if that ITT refers to the same thing.
Okay.
But there was an interdepartmental task team. It may be that.
Yes. And then it says, or informing the minister, notwithstanding the potential impact on national security. The nub of the matter was, of course, Pikoli's decision to move ahead with the prosecution of Flock and others in the face of opposition from the political level. Was it your understanding that that Mr. Pikoli's decision to prosecute Flock and others was the reason for this inquiry being constituted?
No, I know nothing about any decision to prosecute Mr. Flock by the NPA and anything related to it.
And then paragraph 280, in the evidence tendered by the government on an add-on complaint was the outrage expressed by Chikani about the lack of truth revealed by the plea bargain in relation to the apartheid state's clandestine program of killing through nefarious means, such as poisoning. It is likely that this concern was included to dress up the main complaint with some moral indignation, since the lack of truth of apartheid era violations was hardly a concern of those behind the removal of Pikoli. What's your response to that allegation?
I don't have a response to this allegation. I know nothing about it.
The allegation, the allegation that this complaint by Chikani, Reverend Chikani, I would like a comment on the last paragraph of that allegation. It is likely that this concern was included to dress up the main complaint with some moral indignation, since the lack of truth of apartheid era violations was hardly a concern of those behind the removal of Pikoli. Is that something that you can comment on?
No, I can't comment. I don't know about it. Those who are behind the removal of Pikoli, I don't know who they are, and I don't know what their thinking was.
Okay. And then paragraph 281 says Dr. Chinala was moved to say in her findings that the complaint also touches very closely on the constitutional guarantee of independence of the NPA to prosecute or not to prosecute, and to do so without fear, favor, or prejudice. And then the next paragraph says, notwithstanding Dr. Chinala, nonetheless, Dr. Chinala did not take this burning issue further, as the government abandoned its complaint against Pikoli in respect of the TRC matters. The likely reason was to curtail closer examination of the role of the government in relation to the cases. I would ask you to comment, Ms. Simelane, but I think that would be unfair. Would you want to comment, Ms. Simelane, on that paragraph that I just read?
If you recall, if you want to link this to the earlier question, the way the government submission was dealt with by the Chinala inquiries, that there was a single government submission. But after the submission of that submission, there was a meeting between the various legal representatives representing the different parties, including government, and the commission, after which an instruction was given by Dr. Chinwala that in light of the concerns, if I recall at the time, that were raised by Advocate Pikoli, that the government submission contains a lot of information and is not sure from whom or from which department some of the allegations are made, that should be broken down and dealt with differently. So the decision that came out, we were told, is that Dr. Chinwala then said each department must put an affidavit in relation to what it is saying or alleging. So I put an affidavit that related to the issues of the role of the DG in terms of the Public Service Act and in terms of the what you call the PFMA. Then others dealt with others. Then the minister, if I recall, submitted her affidavits that dealt with something else. That is how the submission was dealt with, because it was felt it doesn't clarify who is alleging what, and therefore it could not be responded to by Advocate Bigoli. So everybody then had to the extent they wanted to say something, they needed to do so by way of affidavits. So I put an affidavit, the other officials from other departments put their own affidavits.
Thank you.
I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, but I'm going to take you straight to 284, paragraph 284, which says, Dr. Chinwala reserved her harshest criticism for Advocate Simelane, who at the time had been DG, Director General of the DOJ, since June 2005. She found that he had given contradictory evidence and deliberately withheld important information from the Commission, thereby attempting to mislead it. She also impugned his conduct as Director General of the DOJ on various grounds. Do you have a comment on that?
Yes, I do. I'll try to be kind to Dr. Chinwala because she's late. The comment that she made, I think, was unlawful and unfair, because I think all of us here in the Commission know the law, that if anybody or a deciding authority is going to make adverse comments about an individual, that individual is first afforded a right to comment to those adverse comments. I was not given an opportunity to comment. Otherwise, if I had been given that right, I would have assisted Dr. Chinwala to understand how wrong she was in a number of respects in terms of her conclusions. If you read her reports in this particular area where she says this, she actually refers to a government submission. So some of the areas that she says were areas where there were contradictions relate to what is contained in the government submission, but which is not contained in my affidavits. So she convolutes. In other words, in my mind, she attributes the putting together of the submission to an individual, which is myself, which is not true, because that's not how it happened.
But I let you answer that question, because the next question I wanted you to deal with is whether there's been an effort by those requesting you to respond to this allegation to link it to the terms of reference of this particular commission. Does this have anything to do with whether the harshest criticism were about the handling of the TRC matters at all?
Nobody has spoken to me about the terms of reference of this commission in relation to that paragraph.
And your assessment of the terms of commission, the terms of reference of this commission in relation to that paragraph, would you say that it is relevant to this commission?
No, it's not.
Why do you say that?
I don't see how. If it is relevant and it can be demonstrated how, I don't have a problem dealing with it. I just don't see. I don't see how.
Yes, I mean, but I would imagine that these comments were made in the context of an inquiry into the fitness of Advocate Bigoli, and not in the context of this inquiry, which is looking at what it is that was done by government in order to stop the TRC, the investigations and the prosecution of TRC cases.
I don't know. The issue of prosecution of TRC cases, I don't recall in the general inquiry me dealing with it in my affidavits.
It wasn't there.
It wasn't there. I didn't deal with it in the affidavits. I don't recall how I would have dealt with it. I didn't deal with it at all. I dealt with the Public Service Act issues, and I dealt with the PFMA issues only in my affidavits. The other issues were dealt with by others who submitted their affidavits as well.
Can you recall Advocate Simelane who dealt with the TRC cases issue or charge?
I don't know. It could have been different people. It depends on the context in which it would have been raised. If it would have been raised in the context of an issue talking to intelligence, it would have been the DG or the DDG for intelligence was assigned to deal with that particular aspect. If the minister was dealt with it in the context of her overall irretrievable breakdown assessment, she would have dealt with it. If somebody else would have dealt with it in the context of what they would have been required to deal with, it would have been dealt with by that person. But for me, I didn't have a basis to deal with it because the issues were not qua the department, because the NPA was running with them and we were fine with it. And the reparations aspect, we were running in them and we were fine with it. So there was nothing that, as the DG of Justice, I was affected by the TRC matters. So I wouldn't have dealt with it. It would have been other people.
Mr. Simelane, perhaps for the sake of expediency, I want you to just, main theme of the rest of the allegations that I would read, they don't mention your name, but they mention political interference as a main reason why there's a belief that the TRC investigations and prosecutions were stopped. You have made a comment on it, but just for good measure, could you respond to whether you believe that it is correct that there was a view in government, or actions by government, or decisions by government that interfered with the investigations and prosecutions of the TRC cases?
I can't speak on behalf of government because I don't speak for government, but in relation to myself and my role as the DG, there was none. In relation to the department and my relationship with the minister and the deputy minister, there was none. In my role as the co-chair of the JCPS cluster, there was none.
Yes, I know you said and you're correct that you don't speak for government, but you at the beginning of your evidence, you painted a picture of how interdepartmentally there was a cooperation and collaboration, and it's that in that context that I was eliciting a comment on whether you believe that there was a concerted effort to try and undermine the prosecution or investigation of these cases. But you've given your answer. I can't take it any further than that.
I would not have known, but on page 40 in paragraph 52 up to paragraph...
Page 40.
Yes, of my supplementary statement up to paragraph... maybe paragraph 58. What I outlined there in the context of what I described earlier is an indication of how, at least overtly, it would have been improbable for anybody to interfere with prosecutions without being detected, or investigations without being detected. Because in the scheme of things, what would have happened, as I described there, is that after the cluster accepted the feedback that the Forum of the DGs gave it about what the meeting concluded regarding the removal from TRC in terms of Advocate Ackerman, regular progress feedback would then come via either the police in respect of investigative capacity they were going to provide, or it would have come via myself on behalf of the NPA vis-a-vis what that contribution has amounted to in the progress of the investigation of matters. The issue eventually never came up because the proposal by the police, or that we're expecting would come from the police about how they would contribute, it never got to be submitted and done, or at least processed by the cluster and discussed, because other things got in the way. There was a Khampepe commission of inquiry, there was the Jinwala Commission of Inquiry, there was the suspension of Advocate Pikoli, there was the prosecution of the commissioner. So the issue never got, as I recall at least, never got closed concretely, because what would have happened is that there would have then been a proposal from the police to the court DGs, who would have discussed it, satisfied themselves that they can back it. Then the police, as lead department, would have brought it to the cluster for discussion and decision by the whole cluster. And then it would have gone to the ministers to say, this is how the police propose they are going to be of assistance. That's the capacity they would have provided. So that would have been interrogated. And any other issue of concern would have been discussed alongside that. Alongside that process, the interdepartmental task team would have also communicated, at least the SAPS representative who would have been seconded there, would have communicated that as well accordingly in that departmental task team that Advocate Pikoli was in charge of. And then they would have dealt with issues in that way. That's how ordinarily the flow of things should have been after the meeting with Advocate Bigoli and Mr. Ackerman. I don't recall it happening. It may have happened, and I don't recall it, but I don't recall it happening because it would have involved that kind of detail. I don't know if I assist to that.
All right. Sorry, Mr. Simelane, because you zoom in on paragraph 58, I think maybe it's important that you just read it into the record. This is paragraph 58.
Page 42.
At page 42.
No, sorry, let me just, I'll deal with it, but let me just correct one thing. I think I cited wrong paragraphs. The paragraphs were referred to paragraph 52 to 58. Those are not the paragraphs I wanted to refer to, but I'll come to them. What I wanted to refer to were the paragraphs in the supplementary statement on page 56, paragraph 50 to paragraph 54, in terms of what I'm saying now, how the process would have been dealt with. So to the extent that I've caused that confusion, I apologize for it. But in respect of paragraph 58,
well, if it's the incorrect paragraph, then you need not read it
okay, no, that's fine.
into the
All right, no, that's
record. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mrs. Simelane, you responded to the notice by giving that first statement, which is written draft on top.
Yeah.
Do you stand by everything?
I stand by it, yeah.
By
It's not a
everything
draft,
that you
it's
say
fine.
in that
I just
paragraph?
forgot to remove the draft, yeah.
Right. And then you submitted subsequently a supplementary affidavit, and you explained the purpose for why you submitted that supplementary affidavit. I will just take you to the areas I believe that may just need you to deal with, and not ask you to deal with everything that you've said in the supplementary affidavit. If you go to paragraph 26 of your supplementary affidavit, there the allegation made in the Galata affidavit was that your appointment as NDPP doomed the TRC cases, and you've responded to that below. Would you want to say anything more than what you've just said? You've said in response to that allegation.
No, I think that suffices, and I think from my recollection of Advocate Chris McAdams' evidence, it supports that. Because you'll recall that in the evidence of Mr. McAdam, and I think in one of his affidavits, it does indicate that at some point around 2009, there was a lost docket, which was later located in the police, and work on it started around 2010, going forward, until the matter could be taken further around 2013, 2014, thereabout. So it goes back to my point that in my time that I was there, 2 years in the NPA, there was no prosecutable matter that was ever presented to me by anybody that I would have said it must not go ahead. So,
but the allegation by Mr. Galata is that there is evidence that, well, according to him, there is evidence that you assigned Advocate Ackerman to other work, so as to prevent him from dealing with TRC cases. What do you say to that?
I didn't deal with Mr. Is it Mr. Ackerman or McAdam?
No, McAdams.
I didn't deal with Mr. McAdam at all. Never spoke to him. Never dealt with him.
But did you assign him any cases?
No, I would never ever assign him any work. He would have been assigned work by his immediate supervisor, and I'm aware that he was assigned other work by his supervisor as part of the PCLU work. So in other words, it's work that is in the mandate of the PCLU that needed to be done. And I'm imagining that his supervisor would have, amongst others in distributing the work, included him to attend to some matters. That would have been the context. But I'm not aware, and I was never told that anything that anybody in that unit that they were asked to work on that related to their work had any impact on any matter they were working on, especially TRC matters.
Is there anything you want to say about the evidence of Mr. Ackerman? You deal with it in paragraph 39. On page
Yeah, no, I see.
52. Is there anything else you want to say
No,
about
I won't say much other than the fact that, I mean, I had Mr. Ackerman when under cross-examination, and I accepted then his explanation. It didn't surprise me because really we don't know each other. I don't know him, he doesn't know me. I didn't assign him any work, and he never reported to me, so it was clear from day one to me that he was talking to things he really didn't know about, things that may have been discussed offline with other people, and he owned them and they made them appear as if they had come from me. He clearly didn't know. So when he indicated that, he didn't know I was a messenger, I think is the term he used, that's fine. The issue that I want to deal with, so I'm happy to accept that. I'm not gonna. My personal views of him, I'll keep to myself. But other than that, I accept his explanation. The issue I want to deal with is this issue of the Rwandan intelligence officials, because that doesn't make sense to me. It really doesn't make sense to me, because as I say in the statement, in light of what I already had heard about him from the other colleagues in the cluster, I would not have wanted to be in the room with him alone. I would have considered that a risk to me, because he's not the person that it was communicated could be trusted in that sense. So I would not have done that. So if him and I would have met and chatted about anything of the type that he described, it would have been in the presence of other people and the context of work being done. So I'm saying that because I'm not ruling out the presence of Rwandan intelligence officers in our environment, firstly, because it was known in the cluster that they were operating in the country for other reasons that are not relevant to this forum, right? But what I do recall involving that particular country in the context of the NPA work was the work that was done towards prosecuting individuals that had attempted to assassinate a Rwandan general who was based in the country. I think his name was General Nyamwaza, who was shot in Senten in an assassination attempt. That matter was prosecuted in my time in the NPA, or at least the beginning of the prosecution in that time. And he wasn't the prosecutor of that matter. If I recall, I think Mr. Sean Abrams was the lead prosecutor in that matter. Obviously, he would have been supervised by Mr. Ackerman and Dr. Ramayite as his supervisors. That's the only matter involving Rwandan generals that I do recall. So any discussion of that matter would not have necessarily come to me other than by way of giving me an update that the matter is progressing normally in the courts. I don't remember that discussion because the matter progressed normally in the courts anyway. But as separate to that, a specific matter involving two Rwandan intelligence officers could only have been in the context of that particular case, to the best of my recollection. So that's why I couldn't remember it. If there's information that can remind me, maybe I'll remember it. But that's what I do recall.
Yes. And then, just to Chair and Commissioners, we apologize that a reference to Advocate Piccolo's book comes in a little later than the evidence has already been given on a reference that we needed to make in that book. But I forgot my book back in Cape Town, and I had to get it from Mr. Howard Vani this morning, and so we just got the document now printed by the Commission, which we are grateful of. The part I would have liked the Commission to have regards to, or rather for Mrs. Simelane to talk to, can you just give Mrs. Simelane a copy? Is the part that deals with Mr. Ackerman, particularly to recall a meeting which Mr. Simelane testified to, and it starts on page 218. This next page, the paragraph that starts with Ackerman was looking at taking a balanced approach. If Mr. Simelane, are you there?
Yes, top of the page, yes.
Top of the page. Can you just read that, because it reminds, it sort of resonates with the evidence you gave about what you believe Mr. Ackerman did in that meeting that you spoke about.
Can you give an indication? Is reading from the top up to which part? I'm not limiting him to any
It would be
part.
just up to police 2, that sentence,
First paragraph.
or that paragraph, yes. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Ackerman was looking at taking a balanced approach with the idea that if he was going to be objective and prosecute those from the ANC, he would then have to look at prosecuting the old order police too.
Yeah. So, would that resonate with your recollection of that meeting in the West Wing that you testified to?
Well, I followed the evidence around this 34 ANC leaders and so forth, and how it was explained by Mr. Ackerman here. So I don't know if this is the same 34 that talks to the list that he gave. I thought I spoke about that. But what it does show to me, without straying, because I don't want to stray, without saying anything more, it does suggest to me that the prosecution of ANC members on the one side, for whatever they would have done, and if it's the 34 and it is the same people that were in leadership in exile, it is consistent with an idea that there was a thought, because I don't know if it was factually true that it was going to be done, but there was a thought on the part of some that those could be prosecuted for whatever crimes that they were, if there was that idea. So much so that if that was going to happen, and to demonstrate the objectivity, they then would have needed to be equally a prosecution of the old order police too. So in that context, it appears to be related.
Thank you, Mrs. Simelane. Mrs. Simelane, I think this is where is there anything else that you think the Commission should know from your side?
No.
Chair and Commissioners, that's the evidence of Mr. Simelane.
Oh, does that conclude
That
your
concludes
evidence,
the evidence,
in chief?
yes. That's correct.
Thank you. I think this would be an appropriate time to take a lunch adjournment and reconvene at 2 o'clock.
There's a picture, 'cause
Ms. Moroka?
Chair, can I just, before clarification questions, there's just one aspect I would like Mr. Simelane to clarify before just one aspect relating to his
Yes.
answer on the Chikani, on his knowledge of the Chikani complaint.
Okay. You may proceed to
Yes.
do so, Mr. Masugu.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Simelane, you recall the question I asked you about, it was in relation to paragraphs 279 in the notice. Which relates to a complaint that Reverend Chikani made against those handling the TRC matters. When I asked if you knew anything about that matter, you said no. But I think you wanted to give a better context.
Yes, no, when I said that I didn't know anything about it, what I meant was I didn't know the details of what the NPA was engaging with Mr. Chikane and the other generals about. That detail I didn't know. What we did know as a forum is that he was unhappy about how he felt he was being treated by them. That was reported, and that's how it became part of what substantiated what others felt about Mr. Ackerman, to say the way he's running the TRC unit and is dealing with people is unfair because they complain about it. So by the time there was a formal letter by Reverend Chikane to the minister, we already knew they would complain about something like that. But the details of when they were meeting him, about what and what they were discussing, that I don't know anything about. It was not a matter that was reported to me.
Thank you, Mr. Simelane. That is all, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Masugu. Ms. Moroka, any clarificatory questions?
No clarification questions, Chair.
Thank you.
Neither do the police have any clarification questions,
Oh.
but we both reserve our rights to apply
Thank
for
you.
cross.
To apply for cross-examination.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes, you are standing in for Ms. Ranto.
Personal emergency, Chair.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Kwala?
Thank you, Chairperson. I have some questions just to clarify. Mr. Simelane, you know that I'm representing the NPA, so my questions just relate to what the NPA would or would not have done. In page 40 of your statement in your bundle.
Sorry, page 40.
40, yes. If you found the page, you'll tell me.
Page 40, yes, I'm on there.
Yeah. I want us to talk about what you say in paragraph 53 of
Yes.
that statement, of your statement.
Yes.
Thank you. The sum total of what you say in that statement, in that paragraph, is that the NPA did have investigation capacity. Do I
Yes, okay.
understand your
Now, I can clarify that.
place?
When Mr. Ackerman in the meeting we had in the West Wing gave an indication of how they work, the impression that I got, I don't know if the others had the same impression, so this is my impression, because it described that they were meeting with people throughout the country who were ostensibly complaining, and that they were meeting with those people and taking their statements, in terms of which they were able to compile a file of the type that they felt that they were going to prosecute on. To me, that suggests that you have some capacity to conduct some investigation, because he never described it in the context ordinarily we would understand it, or I would understand it, where he says there's a matter at police station X about an assault or an attempted murder, and the IO investigating officer has brought that matter to the relevant DPP office in the normal course for consideration for prosecution. It's not how he presented it. He presented it that, such that the impression you could get is that somehow the PCLU is able to conduct some form of investigation of the type that it enables it to be put in a position where it makes a decision. What I did know, at least as a matter of fact, is that the NPA actually did not have capacity to conduct any form of investigation because it didn't have the people to do that. So if they were doing it, it would be a capacity that is structured in the way that it suits themselves. But that suggested that at least they could investigate something.
But when they meet those people, as he would have reported, they would meet them as prosecutors, not as investigators. Would that be correct?
Well, I don't know in what capacity they would meet them, in the sense that they are prosecutors, that's what we would know. So if they are meeting people, and the way they described it, it would indicate that they traveled throughout the country, wherever people went. Others would come to them, or they would go to people. And in the context of what he was describing, including instances that happened, for example, outside of South Africa, he indicated that they would verify. So in your mind, when you're listening to that, it tells you that there is some way in which those individuals are able to search and verify and find information. So in that context, it suggested that there is some element of capacity that enables them to be able to reach those conclusions, which ordinarily they shouldn't have, in light of the fact that they don't have, as far as we knew, the TSO had been established at least by around that time.
Yes. But to your knowledge, was it within their mandate to do the investigation?
Well, it depends on how they work. Remember that at that time, the big debate around the NPA was prosecutor-led investigations. I think you've heard of that phrase. And many people interpret it differently. Some in the NPA who are advocates for that model say that those are prosecutor-led investigations, which suggests that they want the prosecutor to take the lead. Some who oppose that model would say that's not how it's supposed to be. So it depends how, at the time, they would have elected to deploy that particular philosophy in terms of the investigations. But in the ordinary course, what I would expect them to do is not lead an investigation, but a police official would lead an investigation that they would support.
Yeah.
But that may not necessarily be interpreted by some as really prosecutor-led.
Yes. Maybe I don't want
What?
I don't want us.
Just a moment. Was a distinction drawn between prosecution-led and prosecution-guided? It seems some people wanted to draw some distinction, or is it a distinction without a difference?
We never discussed that in the cluster either as a forum or as the cluster as a whole. But in the charter, when things were discussed in general, what was understood, prosecutor guided are what we know in the normal course, that a matter goes to the police station, detectives investigate, they go back and forth to the prosecution to get guidance about what further evidence to obtain. That's prosecution guided. Prosecution led, as advocated during the time that the Scorpions were there, and when they were dissolved, others continued to advocate, where investigations where prosecutors in a way lead and take charge of the investigation, and then instead of guide but inform investigators what to go and find. Somebody would say it doesn't really make much of a difference, but the small difference that it makes is that primarily an investigator ends up taking a back seat to be guided by a prosecutor, whereas in prosecution guided, it's actually the other way around. The owner of the investigative docket becomes a police official.
Yes, thank you.
But at a time when you were at the NPA, they did not have the capacity to investigate.
No, they didn't. No, they didn't.
When you say, I asked you if they had a mandate, you say it would depend. It would depend on what?
What I've just described, that they didn't have a mandate as in law, if I can put it that way, as far as I recall at least. They didn't have a legal mandate to conduct investigations.
I thought as
But,
much.
but when prosecutors, some of them do get investigations, people do more than sort of sit and just wait to be informed what is there. So their manner of guiding, others would interpret as going a little bit overboard.
Still in paragraph 53, you make an example about the case of Reverend Chikane.
Yes.
The impression I get is that you suggest that the visit by the NPA to Reverend Chikane was informed by their investigation. Would you not take it as follows, that when they visited Reverend Chikane, they were actually doing a consultation, consulting with the victim, as opposed to them exercising their capacity to investigate?
It also could be that, yes.
I'm asking this question, Mr. Simelane, because as I understood from the evidence of Mr. Ackerman SC, and also in the statement that is submitted by Mr. Mthunzi Maga, which you probably have not seen yet, they say, the sum total of what they say is that they did not have investigation capacity. So what appears in your statement then seemed to be against what they are saying. Hence, I wanted those clarities.
You want clarification?
I'm done, Judge.
Or are you probing?
No. I didn't want a situation where, at the end of the day, when another evidence is submitted, it is contradictory to the other. And then we do not intend to cross-examine the witness, so we wanted to place that so that he can comment if he has got a comment. I don't want it to elevate it to the level of a cross-examination. I was hoping that he can just comment on that, unless you disallow.
I will disallow it, Mr. Kuala.
Yes.
Yes.
No, I accept that. Commissioner. We may have to, if needs be, we may have to apply
Yes.
for cross-examination.
Yes, you may do
But
so.
we hope it will not get to that stage. Thank you. That will be done then.
Thank you, Mr. Kuala. Mr. Vani?
Chair, we have applied to cross-examine this witness.
Yes. Thank you. Mr. Siminya?
Chair, may we defer, with your permission, questioning of the witness for now?
Advocate, is there any re-examination, Mr. Masuku? I gather there is none. Thank you. Thank you. Advocate Simelane? There is an application for cross-examination that has to be adjudicated by the chair. And there is an indication that there are further applications for your cross-examination by the other parties.
Yes.
For now, you are excused as a witness. You may be recalled for your cross-examination.
I understand.
You are excused as a witness.
Thank you.
Mr. Masuku, that should be the conclusion of the proceedings.
That would conclude.
Thank you. Mr. Siminya?
Correct, Chair.
Yes. We are adjourned for the day. We'll reconvene tomorrow at 10 o'clock.